Good morning. My name is Bob Hunley, and welcome to Wythe County in Wytheville. We're glad to be here in God's country. And I'm a member of Hanover County School Board, and I have the pleasure of serving as the VSBA immediate past president. On behalf of President Scott Albrecht and the entire VSBA Board of Directors, I would like to thank all of you for the work you are doing as the leaders, advocates, and supporters of public education in your state. Today's Hot Topic conference will be focused on addressing student success, a topic that is important and relevant to every school division regardless of its locality. Despite the challenges we face, I am increasingly confident in public education's future, primarily because of the dedication and passion of the people in this room. We are so excited to have members of the West Virginia School Boards Association with us again for our fourth joint conference. If you're from the West Virginia School Board Association, would you please stand and let us recognize you? So in case you didn't see, we have two more over here. So we're glad that y'all are with us today. I think that's a great example of regional cooperation. I'd also like to take a moment and recognize any members of the VSBA Board of Directors who are here with us. If you're on the Board of Directors, would you please stand? Paul? Thank you for your service to our organization. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our sponsor of today's conference, Mountain Valley Transportation. We greatly appreciate their continued support of our association. Please be sure to stop by their table located near our registration area just outside these doors. I'd also like to thank WHRO for recording this conference. To kick off our session today, I would like to introduce Dr. Jared Cotton, Superintendent of Henry County Public Schools, Monica Hatchett, Director of Communications and Organizational Learning for Henry County Public Schools, and along with Dr. Keith Perrigan, Superintendent of Bristol City Public Schools, and Crystal Miller, Department Director, School-Based Services, Highland Community Services for Bristol City Public School. That's a long title. Why don't y'all come on up to the front? And they are going to talk to us about how we can engage the community to support student success. Please join me in welcoming our panel.
Good morning. I hate being behind this podium right now, but I'm going to have to fight through it. I feel like I need to be mobile. I might have to come take that mic from you. Anyway, I'm Jared Cotton. I'm happy to be here. I'm the proud superintendent for Henry County Public Schools, and I'd like to introduce a couple of my staff members, Monica Hatchett over here quickly running to take a picture of me, and David Scott, who's our Director of Student Services, and of course we're going to get to our great colleagues over here shortly as we get started. I'm really excited to talk about our topic today, the power of partnerships. And I have to tell you that that's how we do the great things that we do for our students in our school division. We couldn't do it without the partnerships that we've developed in our school division. This is one of my favorite quotes that I like to start with. Every kid is one caring adult away from being a success story. And ultimately our goal is to support our students. Let me tell you a little bit about Henry County Public Schools. We were the furniture capital of the world. Bassett Furniture, Hooker Furniture, Stanley Furniture. Of course, all that changed several years ago, and we had to redefine what we were all about in our community. And of course, we had some big challenges that we faced. It's not different from many of the school divisions represented here, but we are approaching a 70% free and reduced lunch rate with our student population. We have many challenges, limited resources, challenges that our students face each and every day. So of course, for us, it became an important point that we needed to look at how we can help our students be successful in many different ways. And this really came down to our strategic plan, which I laugh when I share this because it's Envision 2018, and guess what? We're here. When we worked on this, we said 2018, that's a long ways away. And of course now we're in the process of developing our new strategic plan, which we believe is going to be called Inspire 2025, still in development. But one of the things that we've learned is you got to brand it. You got to give it a name so that people know the great work that you have ahead for you and for your community. We have some goals that are listed here, but the one in particular is the last one, family and community engagement. We really believed that we have to partner with our community to serve our students and to serve our students well. And one of the things that I came to realize when I got to Henry County is we have a lot of partners that want to work with us to do great things for students. But one of the challenges we had was that they were all coming to us from all different directions, and we were trying to figure out ways that we can work together and partner to support students. And we weren't real strategic about it, if I'm going to be honest with you. And we've gotten to where now we're a little more strategic about how we work through these kinds of partnerships that we build. And what we do is we really focus on our goals, our vision, our mission of our strategic plan, but we also start with a challenge. What is the challenge we're trying to address, and what challenges do our students face? So what I'd like to do this morning, and I know you love this because it's early, right? And I'm still trying to catch my breath from coming up the mountain. I have to tell you, it was a little scary this morning. But what I'd like to do is give you a few minutes to talk at your table. What are some of the challenges that you face in your school division and your community? And let's just have an open conversation at your table for just a few minutes. Let's go ahead and have that talk. Okay, let's share out a couple challenges. If you'd finish your sentence, not your paragraph. Let's share out a couple challenges. Keith has volunteered to be our MC, so he's going to come around. He's got the mic. Right away, I heard some of you say lack of funding. So I heard that. I heard that probably immediately. Can I get some volunteers to share some challenges that you're facing in your school division and community? If you just raise your hand, Keith will come to you. And if they don't raise their hand, Keith, just go up to somebody and hand them the microphone, and because we're all about wait time, right?
Okay, Greg Brown from Russell County, and one of the things that we spoke about was the fact that the family structure that we deal with now is much different than the family structure when we went through and we were toddlers and young adults and so forth, and the fact that we're dealing with 50% or more of the population of our student body with families that aren't mom and dad. It's hopefully at least mom and a stepfather or what have you, a rekindled family, if you will. Sure. We have a lot of aunts and uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers that are raising students that go to our schools, and I think that's probably an issue for all of us.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for being first. All right, who's next? Martinsville, you know your hand better come up because we're coming. We're coming to you.
Yes, the large, bold topic of funding, of course, that goes into a lot of areas, you know. Just like last night, we had a meeting at Grundy High School concerning school safety, and we need more SROs, and of course that comes back under funding again. But there's just numerous things, raises for teachers,
sure,
unmandated things from the state,
unfunded
that big funding
mandate
category. And then we had enrollment loss, which was
Gotcha.
a big thing.
Okay, lots of challenges. All right, Martinsville, Dr. Talley.
I'm only speaking because you called me out.
That's what friends do.
We will take care of that when we get back home. Okay, I'm sorry. This is family. The same challenges that you face. Poverty, of course, all of our schools have free and reduced lunch or free lunch now. And so poverty is a big factor. We never use it for an excuse. And so we have a lot of accreditation going because we refuse to let that stop us. But it is certainly a different life growing up in poverty. Growing up where a lot of our industry, like you said, have left the situation, and then trying to attract, educate our students while trying to attract industry that will support families. We were talking about that at our table. Just industry that families can have a living wage that would suffice them, and then you don't lose population because of it. Yeah. And of course, this whole end of the state's losing population. So those are just a few. I can give you a whole list.
I know.
Of challenges.
That's a good list. Somebody else? Okay. All right. We got another brave soul. Let's do one more. All right.
Hi, I'm Connie Froggatt. I'm from Montgomery County, and we have a very different set of challenges from a lot of particularly divisions in southwestern Virginia in that we're growing. We're up 250 students and down 50 teachers since 2010, but the problem is the revenue base is not following that growth. And it's particularly hard for us because so much of our property, being Virginia Tech and the National Forest, is not taxable. And so we have a huge corporate research center sitting there with all kind of business going on, and we're getting no taxes from that. Wow. So for us, that has been one of our biggest challenges, is trying to serve these students without any growth revenue.
Gotcha. Wow. All right. Well, thank you all for sharing your challenges. And we didn't do that so that we'd all be depressed. We did that so that we can remind ourselves that that's our starting point. That's where you really want to start. When you're thinking about the challenges that we all face, that's where you start with your partnerships. And as I said before, we kind of started linking in with lots of different partners. And we had all these partners in our communities who came to us and said, we want to partner with you. Will you sign off on this grant? Will you do this? Will you support us on this? And what we found is they were all over the place because we hadn't been clear about what problems we wanted to solve. And we needed to work on clearly articulating our challenges and then going to the table with our partners, asking them how they can support us with our specific challenges. So that's a whole different way to approach it. And of course, I will tell you that we're getting better at that. We didn't start out that way. Some of the things that I want to share with you just to get the conversation going today is just some things that we've done with our partnership. And we've really looked at this as ways that we can support our students in many different areas, because we believe in supporting the whole child, not just academically, right? Academics are important, but social, emotional, safety, which I heard as well, all of those things are important when you're looking at supporting children in your community. Some of our academic partnerships that I want to share with you that we've found a way to make those connections. One of the things that we do, and I'll just highlight some of these, Read to the Paw, which sounds kind of interesting. We actually have our students read to dogs from the local SPCA. And you may say, okay, I don't think the dog's comprehending what you're reading. And you're right, at least who knows, but anyway, I'm assuming. But our students get the opportunity to read to somebody, and that's been a great partnership. We also have a partnership with our local Piedmont Arts, where we have artists in residence. We have this phenomenal partnership that we formed with the Capo Music, where our special education students participate in musical performances throughout the year. Something that we're very proud of, which David Scott is very much involved in, is our First Offender Program, where we have a partnership with our local Piedmont Community Services, where they provide parent training and student counseling when there's a first offense with drugs or alcohol. And the reason that this became a partnership is because what we were doing was we were suspending students who had a first offense with drugs or alcohol, and the problem was they came back and they didn't learn anything because they were out of school for a period of time. And we even had students that didn't return to school because they were out for a period of time. So that was a challenge that we were trying to solve, and we have partners that worked with us. Something we're real excited about is our truancy program with the 21st District Court, where they're helping us with attendance. I didn't hear anybody say anything about attendance as a challenge. Is attendance a challenge for some of you all? Some. And that's been a great partnership. Smart Beginnings with preschool readiness. We had an issue with math teachers not prepared to teach mathematics, especially high-level mathematics. So we have Eastman, which is one of our companies, and they said, we'll partner with you and provide a Mathletes program to provide summer training for your math teachers. And guess what the cost was for that? $0. It's free. So again, a great partnership. We also have Reading Buddies. We said we need somebody to read to our students. And guess what public safety said? We'll come to your schools. We'll read to your students. We'll volunteer. And then, of course, if you don't know where Henry County and Martinsville are we have a speedway, right? Martinsville Speedway. And we also have launched Read Your Way to the Race, which has been a powerful way that we support reading. So, the reason I share some of these with you is because the challenges that we faced in Henry County were poor student attendance, right? So we had to do something about that. Something else that we deal with high poverty is literacy. Literacy is an issue that we're struggling with. Even though our students are performing well in other areas, we continue to struggle in literacy and reading. So you can see how we made some of these partnerships and we put some of these in place. So when we started looking at these partnerships, it really changed everything that we do for students. Because one of the things you find in a community like ours is we're limited on resources, limited on opportunities for students. So we decided we need to provide different pathways for our students, different opportunities. Because one of the things that we learn is when students go to the alternative school, and this may happen, I'm sure, in your communities as well, some of them do really well at the alternative school. And we had this interesting problem that when students went to the alternative school, they didn't want to go back to the regular school. And that caused us to say, okay, something's not right here, because the plan is they go back eventually. But they didn't want to go back. And what we learned was we were not providing them what they need to be successful. So that caused us to totally rethink how we provide high school education. And this led to this wonderful wheel, which changes daily, by the way, because we keep adding different opportunities, where we started looking at career pathways for our students. And guess what? We did not have the teachers to provide it. We did not have the funds to provide it. But we did have a powerful partner, Patrick Henry Community College, who came to us and said, we'll provide you the resource. And oh, by the way, the students can take these courses for free at no cost to families. So that's a pretty good partner that came out of this discussion. We also looked at ways that we can approach students who are not your traditional students, students who are having trouble, are behind, need to make up credits, they're behind in some credits. So we started offering blended learning online opportunities for our students, and that led to another great partnership and our Success Academy, where our students are learning at their own pace with teacher support and moving forward with meeting graduation requirements. We also provide the early college, which is noted here, and I already alluded to the ACE program, the ACE Academy, that we provide to our students. And then as I talk a little bit later, another great partnership is providing our students the opportunity to go to community college at no cost after high school if they meet certain requirements. So that's just yet another partnership. But the reason I want to reinforce these things to you is because you see how it changes when you go to the partner with a problem you're trying to solve versus, what can you do for us? So if you're very strategic about the problem you're trying to solve, it does help with this work. Some other things that I want to share with you that has led to some great partnerships. In Henry County, we decided that we believe in student leadership. We want our students to be prepared for college, career, and life. And we know that our students need to be leaders. Wouldn't you all agree that our students need to be good communicators, collaborators, critical thinking, communication, 4 C's. Of course, in Virginia now it's the 5 C's because we have to get citizenship in there. And I was at a conference recently where we got up to about 13 C's, because you can keep adding the C's, but I told them I think we need to land on the 7 C's because I think that's probably where we need to come in on that. But we have our freshman mentor program, the SOTA program, the Student Organization for Developing Attitudes, which is a great partnership and a great program for students. But something that I wanted to share with you that's been very powerful is our partnership with Chick-fil-A, the Chick-fil-A Leadership Academy. Do you all have a Chick-fil-A in your community? Some do. You've arrived when you have a Chick-fil-A, right? We have a Chick-fil-A. We have a Walmart and a Chick-fil-A, so we're good. So we had an opportunity to work with Chick-fil-A, and that's been a great partnership for student leadership. So we also felt like we need to make sure our students are college and career ready. So that led to us building additional partnerships in this area. We have the O. Henry program, where our students go out and spend time with local businesses in internship opportunities. And of course, we had to spend a lot of time working through this, because the worst thing that can happen is you send a student out and that student's not ready, because the local businesses will say, you know what, no thanks, don't send me anymore. And so you need to make sure that you prepare those students for those great opportunities, and that's been a partnership with many local businesses. We also have implemented tours of Patrick Henry Community College. And I'm a little embarrassed to tell you this, but when I arrived in Henry County, some of our counselors and teachers did not even know about some of the program offerings at our local community college. And so we started with a tour for guidance counselors as well as principals, and that made all the difference. And then we started doing tours for our students. All of our 7th graders go through Patrick Henry Community College to learn about all the great opportunities that are available. And they also learn about early college through Patrick Henry Community College, which we've already talked about. And as I said, that used to cost our students and their families. But through that great partnership now, our students, like I said, go for free. Now, I will tell you this. There's a cost to free. And if you have this wonderful opportunity, sometimes we don't value free. So what we've had to do is institute certain expectations of our students when they participate in the early college. Because if you're going to go for free and we're going to pay for you to have that opportunity, then you need to do well and perform. And this has really led to some very high expectations for our students. We also have the SOVA Career Expo. Any school divisions in here participating in the SOVA Career Expo? No? I'll describe it as a career fair on steroids. And this is a great partnership with local businesses. We go to Chatham, and all these local businesses come together, and you don't just walk around and talk to these business owners. They are required to participate, have students participate in activities related to the job or the career. So you'll have students laying bricks. You'll have students maybe operating machinery safely, right? You'll have students that actually are involved in some of the activities that you would be in that particular job. And what do you think our local businesses thought about this? Okay, they love it, because they are getting a future workforce of students who are very interested in these opportunities. We also do tours of other programs. I want to share something with you that's been very powerful. We call it the Mix Exchange, where we have our teachers and guidance counselors and administrators visit local businesses so they can see the skills required for those jobs. And we have a lot of opportunities in advanced manufacturing. And when you hear advanced manufacturing, who knows what that is, right? You don't have a really good understanding, but once teachers have that opportunity to go visit and students have that opportunity, then they learn more about the skills required for those fields. We also have career coaches through Patrick Henry Community College. We have the UVA college guides. Anybody else in here have college guides through UVA? Okay. For $10,000 for each guide, it's a partnership with UVA where each of our high schools have a college guide that's near their age to work with them on planning for college. And what they found is these college guides are close in age to the high school students, and the high school students tend to listen to them a little bit better than the rest of us, right? Because we graduated many, many years ago. A couple other things I want to mention. We have a partnership with Patrick Henry Community College for the VPT and the NCRC. All of our 10th graders take the Virginia Placement Test because we feel like all of our students should be college ready and should have the opportunity for dual enrollment. And we don't pay for that. Patrick Henry Community College pays for that. We also have all of our students participate in the National Career Readiness Certification Assessment. And many of you have heard about that as well. And that's at no cost because, again, that's a partnership with Patrick Henry Community College. Are you getting a theme here? Free. Free is a theme. It's a good theme. We have other things that we've done with college career readiness, and I've listed some things here. We have the Virginia Tech Collaborative for our students who've never attended college before, first-time college students, and that's been a powerful partnership. It used to be called, I believe, Upward Bound. Is that right? We also have a partnership with the United Way, where our students learn what it's like to have a budget, and they learn how to spend on a limited budget, and they learn that the job opportunities they're looking at will not support their lifestyle. So that's very important. We have other partnerships that are listed here. I want to mention the Seed Fund, which is new, and that is an opportunity for all of our high school graduates to go to college for free with our Harvest Foundation. And our Harvest Foundation, which is a foundation that provides support for education and healthcare, and our students can go to college for free if they meet certain criteria, and that's a pretty exciting initiative that's just been launched very recently. Something I'm real excited about when we help our students financially is our backpack program. I know many of you have the backpack program as well, but we've launched something new this year called School Pantries, where we provide school supplies, sanitary supplies for students, as well as food items. And guess who came to the table to provide those for us? Our local churches. Our local churches are sponsoring every school in this effort, and we're very excited that we're going to provide this opportunity for our students. We have our Back to School program through several churches where every student before the school year starts can get a haircut, free shoes, a backpack, full of school supplies before they even start school. And that's been a powerful collaboration in our community. And it had such an impact on me when I had a chance to visit for the last couple of years. I know Dr. Talley has as well. What we've learned is we need to do this year-round. So we've expanded our partnerships there. And, of course, Mrs. Hatchett is recovering from Project Prom. We collect gently used prom dresses, I'd say. Of course, we had some from the 70s, I think, that the girls were not quite interested in. But, of course, vintage, right? So anyway, so young ladies can come and get a prom dress for free at no cost. And that's been a powerful collaboration that we put in place. And Coats for Kids is our great partnership with Walmart, where we provided how many coats to kids this past year? Any idea? 2,300 coats to kids out of a school division of 7,000. So if that gives you a sense of how powerful that is. So we also look at supporting our students emotionally, and of course we have the Lunch Buddy program that we put in place. We did provide funding in our budget for background checks because we found out that that was a barrier to many of our volunteers because there's a cost and a process that they have to go through. We also have a Q School or Young Gentlemen's Club. One of my board members here, Mr. Gravely, is involved in that program. And of course, I love this picture. These young men are learning how to tie their ties, which has been a great partnership as well. And then Piedmont Community Services through our partnership, because we said, our students need support. And they said, guess what? There's this wonderful grant opportunity. Every one of my schools has a Piedmont Community Services counselor serving students daily. So isn't that powerful to help our students with any emotional needs? Socially, we have some partnerships that we put in place. Just a couple I'll mention. Eastman, I talked about earlier. We do our distracted driving awareness program. The Lions Quest Character Education is our curriculum for guidance in elementary, and that's free. And of course, Mr. Scott's involved in that. We have a TV show called Family Connect, Monday nights at 6:30. And very low cost. With our local cable company, we found that we can reach out to families through Family Connect. And of course, we have this great partnership with Communities Helping Improve Local Lives. It's called CHILL. And that's our group of students who work on helping our students be successful and say no to drugs. So that's another great partnership socially. Physically, we have a great partnership. Again, this was another challenge we were facing. We had our students participating in athletics, and we did not have any athletic trainers there. And we couldn't afford it, nor did we know where we'd find these folks. So with Sova Health, we were able to get athletic trainers at our high school games. And guess where we started? Free. They offered that to us for free. And then after a couple of years, they said, it'd be nice if you give us a little bit of money, maybe $10,000. And we said, I think we can do that. So we ended up at a very low cost continuing to have athletic trainers. And I will tell you, they are worth their weight in gold when you have an unfortunate situation with a student being injured. Our mobile health clinics, our running clubs, we have our Go Far Club, our Girls on the Run, and of course, you may not be able to see this picture, but that's Jimmy Johnson running with our students. And we all know who Jimmy Johnson is, right? Running with our students, and of course, that's another great partnership. And then our local healthcare providers are working with our students on getting their EMT certifications, and as well as providing first aid and CPR training for our students. And then, of course, safety. I can't speak enough. I heard somebody talk about safety concerns. Our partnership with the Sheriff's Department, not only do they provide support with our safety drills, but they provide professional development. And in this particular case, our school resource officers come out. We have 2 days in the park that we do, and they're out there meeting with students and and they're involved in activities with our students to make sure that they know they're here to support them. And of course, the Drug-Free MHC Coalition is a group we're working with right now, and they have worked with us on this great initiative called In Plain Sight. Am I correct on that? Where they set up a bedroom, a typical high school student bedroom, where all of these things are hidden. All of these dangers, drugs, safety issues, where you walk into the space, and we were laughing. We just had our fast track trade show, and they put up a big curtain, and it said, "For adults only." So I got a lot of attention, obviously, at that particular event. But it is a powerful, again, partnership that we've had in place. So something else that we've learned through this process is you've got to communicate all these great resources and opportunities. We do 2 family days in the park that we've already talked about. We've also implemented something called Peach Jar. I don't know if you all are using Peach Jar. We got a lot of flack initially because people said, that's all electronic. But what we're finding is it does email information to our students and their parents. And what we found is our middle and high school students don't tend to bring flyers home. I don't know if you all have this problem or if it might be a Henry County problem, but they don't bring things home. So Peach Jar does provide, information directly to their phones and mobile devices. When we surveyed our families, over 90% of them have access on their phone. We also use School Messenger, which now you can send information through email and text. And the other nice thing about School Messenger is you could send information out in different languages. And that's been a game changer for us. And of course, Monica was sharing with me just recently that we have a hearing impaired family where they've made the request to get all of their messages in print versus the phone messages. So again, you don't realize until you go down this path, that there are all these different concerns and issues that you really need to address to make sure you include everybody. And of course, social media, we use social media. We use Twitter quite a bit and Facebook. Unfortunately, that's where they are. They're still on Facebook, right? They're killing us on Facebook. But yeah, the parents are on Facebook. And it's a whole different world because we've had issues where I talk to parents about concerns that they have, and they want to tell me how many likes they have on their complaint that they posted on Facebook. And I say, well, that's great. Can we work on the problem, offline? But now they're trying to be Twitter famous or Facebook famous, apparently. We also are working on our parent toolkit, which we're in development. and we're continuing to work on recruiting our volunteers. So what I wanted to do today was just share. I didn't want to just give you a long laundry list of things, but I wanted to provide you with some ideas of things that we're doing that have worked out really well to support the whole child in all different areas. And I hope you can tell that it's been a game changer for us. We're really doing a lot of things for our students. And what I want you to think about now is you all talked about your challenges earlier, and now I want you to have a conversation at your table about untapped potential or untapped resources in your community. Are there resources in your particular community that maybe you have not partnered with who may be able to help you address some of the challenges we discussed earlier? So let's have that conversation at your table. Okay, let's talk about some untapped potential. Some volunteers. See, we're warming up. We're getting to know each other. So let's raise your hand and let's see who wants to share some ideas.
There you go.
No quick movements. You might be picked.
My name is George Foster. I'm from Craig County, Virginia. We have, so I guess some untapped potential would maybe be some of your small businesses, getting them involved with your vocational programs. I know I think most of ours don't participate. Our kids are shipped out to Botetourt for our vocational stuff, but we don't have a lot of industry, or we don't have much retail, but just getting more people in the community involved. That seems to be a problem nowadays. With everybody's busy nowadays. People work 2 jobs, trying to raise their kids, and I know we struggle having volunteers to help out with the school stuff, like field day at school, and even our PTO struggles. I mean, you try to set a PTO organization up, and you have 2 teachers show up and 5 parents, and it's discouraging. But that's just one of the untapped. I think it's untapped volunteers is one of the biggest things we need more of to help out in the school systems.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the businesses, I was just at an event like I shared in Arlington, Virginia. It was a workforce event. Lots of business leaders there, lots of folks from industry, and they said these businesses want to partner with you. They want to work with you. You just need to ask. And they said they're more than willing to work with you because guess what? They want the future workforce. They want to be an option for some of your graduates, so they're willing to partner. Go ahead. We have another volunteer? No? Okay. If you move quickly, you may be selected. Let's get somebody else. I haven't heard from anybody over here. Anybody over? And I see one of my board members in the back. Anybody over on this side want to share an idea? All right, Keith, pick somebody.
Scotty's never back.
I'm real bashful. I really, truly am. I've always had that issue since I was a young person, and my sisters have it as well, but, you got to step out of the box sometimes. I agree with the gentleman over there from, was it Craig County? Yeah, we don't have a lot of industry in Buchanan County either. That's an issue that's paramount there. We've got coal, and it's dwindling, and I don't know how long it's going to last, but our table mentioned a couple of things here a minute ago. Ms. Hibbets, our superintendent, mentioned we partner with the YMCA down there to do an after prom party, and the lady that's the director there, she's also used to work with the Office on Youth in our county, and so that's one good strong thing there with the partnering. And then, of course, we got the Appalachian School of Law. We've been trying to utilize those students to help us in our school system, as well as the Appalachian College of Pharmacy, which is a great resource if we can get all that set up down the road. But it is good possibilities, but we're just lacking in partners in our area.
Gotcha. Okay.
Jared, while somebody else is getting ready to raise their hand, I'll say that I think for all of us, as we move into the new profile of the graduate era, we're going to have to develop great partnerships with industry and businesses in our community to make sure those internships and mentorships are available so that students can check that off the list as they're heading towards graduation.
Sure, exactly. And by the way, we've started thinking outside the box on learning opportunities for our students. I'll give you an example. some of our students have part-time jobs, whether it's Taco Bell, Chick-fil-A, and for a long time we kind of looked at that as like, well, they have a part-time job, they need to make extra money. And then a lot of our students would say, well, we need to leave school early because we need to go to work. And we thought, well, no, your priority is school, and you need to be in school. So what we've done is we've started looking at that a little bit differently in Henry County. We say, okay, you have a job. We're going to let you leave early, but you're going to be involved in a workplace seminar that's going to meet monthly, where you're going to learn about leadership and customer service, and like the Chick-fil-A owner comes in and talks about customer service, real life skills that our students need to be successful. So essentially they're taking a course throughout the semester, and again, rethinking where learning takes place, because don't you all think you learned a lot from your part-time job? I've had many part-time jobs, and when I was in school, I had lots of jobs. And I learned a lot from each and every one of those. So why not capitalize on the learning opportunity? Is there anybody else that has an untapped potential? What do we call it? The workplace part? I don't think we just called it Work Ready Seminar is kind of what we call it. They do. They can get a local credit that we've put in place. And again, thinking outside the box, because I took a hard line. Well, you're not leaving school early. That was kind of my approach. And now we're thinking we need to realize that learning takes place at many different levels, right? I used to be a lifeguard, and I have to tell you, I learned a lot being a lifeguard. I was in charge of all those little children in front of me in that pool, and you want to talk about a lot of stress for a 16-year-old. But I think that's where I learned the leadership, and a lot of the opportunities that brought me to where I am today. Of course, you may disagree, but but again, those are great learning opportunities. Anybody else untapped potential? I know we got to move on to the next.
A friend from West Virginia.
All right.
So we are becoming known as the Saudi Arabia of gas, and so we want to do better this time with the gas companies, drilling companies, than we have in the past. And they are coming forward, helping our school with money for choirs, sports fields, other things. But there's a lot more we can do. Of course, our teachers need more salary. We need more things we can do with the gas itself. So we're excited about that opportunity.
Sure. So great. That's a potential partner that you can work with. And before I pass it to Keith Peregrine, I do want to just recognize my board members. If you raise your hand, I'm not going to leave the podium without saying thank you for joining me on that scary ride up here this morning. But thank you for being here. And I'm proud to introduce Keith Peregrine, who's a good friend of mine, superintendent from Bristol.
Thanks, Jared. That's a tough act to follow. Gina, in the future, I'd like to request that if you partner me with someone, that you maybe find someone a little less impressive for me to follow. That's a lot of pressure to follow Jared. Great job, Jared. He mentioned that he was a lifeguard, and now that I think about it, he does kind of have a David Hasselhoff kind of look. Really, right? Right? Did you drive a Trans Am with your? Okay. Okay. So I want to take just a moment, a little point of privilege. I'm like to recognize one of my friends and colleagues who was just nominated and accepted as our Region 7 Superintendent of the Year. He's also the VAS President of our current year, Dr. Brian Ratliff. Congratulations. I'll pay for that later, but certainly he's been a great leader, not only in Region 7, but in Amherst County, and also been a great friend to me, and I appreciate that. I'd like to start off today doing a little activity. And, I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and so if you grew up in a Southern Baptist church, you may have experienced something like this. So at this time, I'd like for every head to bow and every eye to be closed. And superintendents that are in the room, I know that you may be feeling a tug at your heart right now. You may have made a decision to close school. If you made that decision today because you didn't want to deal with a student walkout, please raise your hand. I know you want to raise your hand. I was not going to be in town, so I went ahead and we went on a 2-hour delay. So I'll let somebody else deal with that in Bristol. But anyway, our high school principal asked for a 3-hour delay because that would have made it at 11 o'clock, our 11 o'clock start, and so the protest would have been over. But anyway, I digress. We recognize all of our West Virginia school board members. Could I also ask all of our Virginia school board members to stand just for a moment? And then could I get you guys to applaud? I made a bet with Crystal that I could get a standing ovation without ever turning a slide. And so thank you for making that happen for me today. I think, so as we talk about partnerships, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the partnership that our local school boards and superintendents have with VSBA, whether it be with policy services, advocacy, professional development like we're having today. I mean, they take a big load off of our plate. So Gina, to you and your staff, thank you for the great partnership that we have with VSBA. I think our hot topic today is very timely. As we continue to reel from the budget cuts we received from the state that go back as far, maybe further, than the 2008-2009 recession, partnerships are not a luxury for school divisions any longer. They're a necessity. As we continue to deal with the state funding cuts that we've had, we know that our localities either can't or won't make up the difference. And so for us to continue to provide a great service for our students, we've got to come up with ways, as Jared said, that are free to make sure that our students have every opportunity for success. I'll tell you a great example that's kind of outside of the normal partnership range that we're forced to do in Bristol. I don't know how familiar you are with the city of Bristol, but we have recently earned the recognition of being one of the 2 most financially distressed localities in the Commonwealth. We have absolutely no room in our debt capacity, and the newest school that we have in our division was built in 1974. Our oldest school is actually 102 years old. We did some renovations of that about 20 years ago, so it's relatively new, right? And our oldest elementary school turned 80 this year, and it is in really bad shape. However, as you know, if you don't have any debt capacity, you can't borrow money. In order to remove that debt, it's going to take 20 years, and then if you borrow money to build a new school, then you're going to be right back up at your debt capacity. And so we've had to look at a partnership, and I know that there's PPA school construction projects all over the place, and we're not just doing it through a design and a construction process. We're also trying to get a private partner to do the financing. And we've got one bid that's in already, and we're expecting 2 or 3 more. And so, that's just another example of the condition that we're in. School construction dollars were taken out of the state budget in 2008 and 2009, and we've not gotten those back. And then as, localities like Bristol struggle just to pay the bills, to think that they can fund building the school, it's impractical. So I think we're going to have to be very creative as we build partnerships in the future. But anyway, enough rambling. Jared has shared a lot of great partnerships that they have in Henry County, some that we're already doing in Bristol, some that I'm sure you're doing. But like all good educators, I think we will also try to ethically replicate some of those. Y'all ethically replicate? Yeah, we do that a lot in education. We steal. And so, Jared, we're going to ethically replicate some of those programs that you guys are doing in Henry County. And so I'll just talk for a few moments about some, I think, unique opportunities that we have in Bristol before I turn the podium over to my friend and colleague, Crystal Miller, who is probably our best partner in the city of Bristol. So, let me first tell you about the Toki Foundation. A few years ago, the Richmond Times did a story on one of our elementary schools. Highland View Elementary, which is also our oldest elementary school, it was built in 1938. It serves our poorest community. over 75% of our students are automatically eligible for free or reduced price lunch without ever filling out a form. And that neighborhood that it serves used to be the neighborhood where, kind of the working poor live, but that has gradually declined, and there's a lot of poverty, there's a lot of crime in that area. But our teachers and staff at Highland View were doing a tremendous job of taking care of not just the academic needs of those students, but all the needs that Jared mentioned earlier. And so the Richmond Times did a story on it, and some folks in Richmond followed up with that story, and the Toki Foundation decided as a result of that story that they wanted to adopt Highland View. And so all of a sudden they started working with church groups, and we started getting truckloads of school supplies coming in from Richmond into Highland View. And then they after they come and deliver those, they realized that many of our students didn't have adequate shoes, didn't have adequate coats. And so they started sending free shoes, not just gently used shoes. They started sending new shoes. They developed partnerships with major shoe manufacturers and started sending shoes to all of our students at Highland View. Then they did the same thing with coats. And this past Christmas, they sent another truckload of shoes to our students at Highland View. And as I try to start my day as often as I can on bus duty at our elementary schools, I can't express to you the pride that our students came in showing off their new shoes the next day after those were delivered. It's phenomenal. And, we don't think about it. One of my colleagues used to talk about kids coming to school with that new school attitude, the new school shoe attitude. You get those new shoes and you got a little hop in your step and you're feeling a little bit better about yourself. Well, our kids at Highland View didn't experience that, but they do now, and they do it very regularly. We get a truckload of shoes 2 or 3 times a year. As a matter of fact, we're trying to encourage our students to be healthy, and so we're trying to get some of our elementary school students to participate in a 5K run with one of our local hospitals. And the Toki Foundation has agreed to provide a free pair of brand new running shoes to any elementary student in Bristol who participates in the 5K. So we're really blessed to have the relationship that we have with the Toki Foundation. And then service learning, I kind of mentioned this in my comments to Jared. We operate at our high school on a block schedule. So we have 8 opportunities a day for students to get a credit, 32 opportunities over the course of 4 years, and students can leave Virginia Middle School with 5 credits. So our students can graduate high school with 37 credits. Well, they don't need that many. And we don't have the funding to provide that many electives. So a few years ago, our administration came up with a program called Service Learning, where they developed partnerships with businesses in our community where students could go out and get real true work experience in those businesses, develop those soft skills, and get a high school credit for it. And so we have partnerships with King University, with a local veterinarian, with the Apple Academy, so some of our students are working with preschool students, and even the Virginia Department of Social Services. We've also, there's a local church, St. Anne's, who has private school, and some of our students serve as teachers' aides there. They work at our community college. And this past year, we've partnered that program with JVG. Does anybody have JVG, Jobs for Virginia Graduates, as part of your school division? So we've partnered our service learning with JVG, and so now not only are they going to these places of business to get work experience, but they're meeting the credentials and requirements that are required through JVG. And so that's turned into a great partnership. It also, because there's a $25,000 grant that goes along with that, it helps offset the cost of the teacher that we have who's in charge of that program. So that's been a great partnership for us in Bristol. Day in the Park, it sounds like Henry County also has a day in the park and doing some of the very similar things that we do in Bristol. 25 years ago, one of our community members decided that he wanted to provide school supplies or backpacks for students who lived in our housing projects in Bristol. So he started the Day in the Park just to do that. Well, it quickly evolved into much more than that. Pepsi is our big sponsor for that. We have food, we have entertainment, we have school supplies, we have every student that comes gets backpacked. All the school supplies that are on the teacher list, they can get free haircuts, they get free shoes, they get free clothes. It ends up being, we even have professional wrestling. So, if all that other stuff is not enough to get you out, we have professional wrestling right there. We set up a ring, and it's just a great fun day for all of our students and for our community. Communities and schools, you're going to hear from communities and schools later here in the day, but community schools came on as a partner with us a few years ago. Graduation rate was a big concern for the city of Bristol, and of course communities and schools tries to work with communities to make sure students graduate. And so they do everything from, they start out at the elementary school getting to know kids and building those relationships. So they have a back to school bash and they soap it up there a little bit, as you can see from the picture. They even sponsored and one of our elementary schools, Washington Lee, serves one of our major housing projects. And so instead of having parents trying to get our parents to come to the school for registration, we took registration to the housing project, and communities and schools sponsored that, provided free lunch and entertainment. So and not professional wrestling, but we did have a good time, and so we got a lot of our parents to get their students enrolled through that process. And then at the middle and high school level, they created a program called HERO, Here Every Day, Ready and On Time. And we were dealing with those attendance issues too, and communities in schools are coming along beside us and trying to help us address those issues, because as you know, as funding is cut, it's been harder and harder to have truancy officers or attendance specialists, so communities and schools fills that gap for us. They also provide a Christmas in July so that high school students can come to school in the best clothes that they can possibly receive. And they took this past year 30 Virginia high school students to Old Navy and completely outfitted them with clothes for the new school year. And then 200 other students were given back-to-school clothes through donations that community and schools went out and got in our community. And then finally, we have a great partnership with the Boys and Girls Club. You know, our students are safe when they come to us, but after school, they're not always safe. And it's not because always that their parents are working and they're latchkey kids, which was a problem when I was growing up. The problem is sometimes that their parents are home. And when their parents are home, it's not a safe environment. The Boys and Girls Club provides an opportunity for our students to have a safe environment after school. We actually partnered with the Boys and Girls Club on the 21st Century Grant. And so our students stay after school at Virginia Middle School, for example, and after they have additional academic work throughout the course of the day, the Boys and Girls Club comes in and provides activities, and then we provide transportation for those students to go back to the Boys and Girls Club. And so from 7:30 in the morning till 8:30 or 9 o'clock at night, our students are in a supervised state. We also provide transportation through working with the Boys and Girls Club from all of our elementary schools. So instead of taking a lot of our kids home, some of our students go straight from elementary schools to the Boys and Girls Club. So those are a few of the things that we're doing that I thought were unique, but it sounds like Henry County is doing some of those, and I'm sure that you probably are as well. But one partnership that we have in the city of Bristol and also in Washington County, maybe some other divisions, is our partnership with Highlands Community Services. And I've known Crystal for many years. She was a student assistance program counselor when I was an administrator in Washington County, and then I moved to Patrick Henry as the principal there. And in my first year, we had, in the first week of school, one of our students commit suicide. And I was first year principal and not really understanding what my role as a principal was, and knowing now I've got to navigate through this crisis. I couldn't have done it without Crystal's support and the support of Highlands Community Services. Well, along the way, later that year, actually it was on prom day, we had another student that same year commit suicide. And so again, I was able to lean on Highlands Community Services, Crystal and her staff, to help us through that. Halfway through my tenure, we had a tornado come through late spring. Completely devastated our community. Again, we worked with Highlands Community Services to take care not of the educational needs of all of our students at that time, but to take care of just their everyday needs. And then my last year at Patrick Henry, we had one of our students who was violently murdered by one of his parents. And then later in the year, another student who committed suicide. And those are things I didn't learn how to handle as I was getting my bachelor's degree or my master's degree. And it took great expertise from folks who are trained in those areas to help guide us and shepherd us through that project. And so without saying anything else besides thank you to Crystal and Highlands Community Services for standing alongside us as we went through all of those processes, I'm going to let her tell you about a lot of the great programs that they offer to our school system. Crystal Miller.
That was a very nice introduction, and I've known Keith for a long time and consider him a very dear friend. And we've walked a long journey, lots of difficult things. No role models. We talk about mental health issues. We talk about parents with mental health issues. Substance abuse, drug use. Those kinds of things. And our kids bring that baggage in with them every day. But the job as educators is to educate, right? It's to teach them math, science, English, those things. However, this is the classroom. Are these kids prepared and ready to come to learn? I'm going to argue no. That they're not. They got too much. I mean, I can think for myself. I'll be 44 this year. I don't always come to work ready to work. I bring some baggage. I lost my mother-in-law last week. It was hard for me to come into work Monday morning, because I carried that baggage in with me. So when we think about our kids coming into school every day, but yet as educators, their job is to, the kids' job is to come in, sit still, behave, be quiet, pass their quiz, do their homework, pass an SOL. But you know what? They may have not slept last night because mom and dad were up fighting all night. Or they're babysitting their two younger siblings because mama had to work last night, and there's no one to care for them. So being very, very sensitive to that. Teachers can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. Schools can't do it alone. So what do we do? What can we do? Again, Highlands Community Services has partnered with the City of Bristol and Washington County Public Schools for well over 30 years, providing lots of different services, a lot of different supportive services, directly or indirectly. And I like the issue of a safety net. Because when you think about walking the tightrope of life, and a kid walking a tightrope, if you only have a net that goes so far, what happens when they get to the middle? There's no net. And so imagining that net at the beginning is just the school, what the school's able to provide, that education pieces. But then what happens when they have a trauma in their life? And in the mental health world, we call trauma big T's and little t's. Big T's are those major life events, loss, abuse. Little t's are the, breakup with boyfriends and girlfriends. How are our kids equipped to deal with those if they don't have the proper supports at home? And a lot of them don't, I was very, very fortunate, and I grew up in a family that I had those supports. And not only in my immediate family, but in my extended family. A lot of our children now, they don't. Family looks very different. Extended family looks very different. And so those natural supports aren't there. So it's so critical then that we have to foster and provide some secondary supports for them in order for them to walk that tightrope. So I like the idea of a safety net because we want to be able to provide that support for our kiddos. So, how are we as a mental health agency able to partner with the schools? And I was talking with a nice lady earlier, I think there used to be just kind of a lot of question of how do you mesh mental health and education? To me, it's a seamless flow because the whole being of a student, it's not just academic. You've got the emotional, you've got the behavioral, you've got all those components that make a student who they are. And so I think you can't take those pieces out. Because again, that kid can't come into the classroom, and shut down all the baggage that they brought in just because you've got to, the teachers have to, they have to get a certain SOL score to move on. So a lot of the different services that we are able to provide, and I'll talk about the ones that we provide most directly, meaning we are actually in the school providing these services to the kiddos. Therapeutic day treatment is a service that we provide both in Bristol and the city, Bristol City and Washington County schools. It is a Medicaid-funded service, so students who have Medicaid are typically the first, they're given that priority list. And it is It is a service where a counselor has up to 6 kids, and they assist that student with whatever issues may impacting their ability to perform academically. And that could be, they've got ADHD, let's see, they've got attention deficit disorder, they can't sit still, they need help with that. And they're not a special ed student. So they're not eligible for an aid, they don't have that support, but the day treatment counselor can teach them skills to be able to pay attention, how to stop fidgeting or how to fidget appropriately so it's not disruptive. That also can serve as a liaison with the family. To try to engage the family into the students' progress at school, because we know a lot of those, and I heard some of you say this earlier, that's a big disconnect. Families just aren't as involved as they used to be, and how do we do that? So the counselor is able to help to facilitate that. Because it is a Medicaid-funded program, it's free to the schools. They just provide space for my counselors to be there. But clearly there are going to be students who don't have Medicaid who still could benefit from the service. So we are able to provide that service. We call it our non-billable, our pro bono kids, that we provide that service free to those students and the families because, the school, the administrator has said, this kid really needs the support. And so then because of that, we might then be able to engage the student in some other services as well. Student assistance program, that is my passion. That's where I came from. I've been with Highlands Community Services for 20 years, and about 15 of those was spent as a student assistance counselor. And that is it's different than day treatment in that it is for any student. It is a free service, voluntary service, so they don't have to have a funding source like therapeutic day treatment. And I like to call it an extension of the guidance office. They help students with any issues. It could be they're, experiencing major anxiety because they have a trig test, and they just really are struggling with how to calm down and relax and study. Or it could be a breakup with a boyfriend or girlfriend. 2 or more serious issues, a kid has experienced some suicidal thoughts, and what do we do with that? And so the counselors are there in-house to be able to provide that. What that looks like in Bristol is a little more indirect, and that if there's a situation where additional counseling might be needed or intervention or consultation, Dr. Perigin or an administrator or a guidance counselor may just reach out to me and say, hey, we've got this situation, what do you think? Can you send somebody here and meet with the family, or what do you recommend? Can I send them to you? And so we just have that collaborative relationship that we can talk about those things, and then we can get that family and student to the appropriate resources that they need. So kind of call that crisis mobilization too. We had a situation, unfortunately, at the beginning of the school year at the middle school in Bristol at the beginning of the school year this year that we sent counselors there just to be on site, just to help students deal with the crisis that was occurring and had occurred, and some of that support is not just always for students. Sometimes it's for teachers too, because the impact of trauma and crises on teachers, is just as real as it is for the babies we're working with. And so sometimes, it's just being able to provide a shoulder or a hug or a listening ear for a teacher who might be struggling or who might need guidance, or an administrator who might need that too, because the responsibility of an administrator is huge. So sometimes just having someone supporting them or checking on them is critical too. And so that program is able to do that. Interchange Alternative School, and I apologize for how it's broken up. Again, I'm not tech savvy, so I can't really take responsibility for that because I didn't do it, but I really don't know how to fix it either. But our Interchange Alternative School is exactly that, an alternative school. For those kids who really struggling to maintain in their home school due to behavioral and emotional difficulties, they are placed at Interchange, which is smaller classrooms, no more than 10 kids in the classroom, a teacher and an aide also in that classroom, and a day treatment counselor. in there. And so it's provided off-site. It's not at the schools, and it is actually a partnership that we have with both City of Bristol and Washington County, and they contribute to that. They provide some funding for the space that we provide, and then we provide those counselors there to be able to intervene. It is an IEP placement, so those students with IEPs are placed there, and so it's another alternative for those kids when they're just really, really, really struggling. And we serve elementary, middle, and high school at that program. And I think he had mentioned earlier about his alternative program and kids not wanting to go back to their regular school. I mean, that is always the goal. We are preparing them to go back to their regular school environment so they can thrive and be successful. Parenting programs. We also have a prevention and education department that provides parenting programs to families, and we've partnered with Bristol City Schools through a 21st Century grant to be able to provide parenting programs at their schools, at the school sites, for elementary, middle, and high school. So you kind of touch on all parenting topics and issues for that age and make it available to those families. Safety Zone is a newer service that we've been able to provide, I guess in the past, I think it's 2 years old now, and it is a crisis stabilization program. Unfortunately, we have kids as young as 5 and as old as 18 that struggle with suicidality, homicidality. And years ago, when they're struggling, they're dealing with that, we assess them. Do they need to be hospitalized? Because can they remain safe in their environment? Can they remain safe at home? Can they remain safe at school? And so a lot of times when that answer was no, you got to look at hospitalization. Well, being in far southwest Virginia, the nearest hospital for us was Roanoke, Stanton, Newport News. I mean, you have to drive a pretty good distance to get a kid hospitalized. And a lot of times those kids are hospitalized on what's called a TDO, a temporary detention order, where the kids they have to be handcuffed. And so talk about trauma. We're creating trauma trying to fix a crisis. So thus Safety Zone was born. And in order to prevent hospitalization. So it is a place that kids can go just during the day, and supportive counseling and services are provided to try to get that student and family, perhaps, at a better place of functioning. So, typically we're seeing the crises that the kids are happening at home, not necessarily at school. It clearly plays out at school, but a lot of times it's because of home stuff. So they're able to come to Safety Zone for up to 15 days at a time and kind of work through some of those issues. And it may be that they just need to process, or we may need to connect them to some additional services, or maybe they need to be removed from the home. And so then we collaborate with the Department of Social Services to kind of make those, get those things happening. Maybe a kid goes into respite, or maybe they are placed into foster care. It's a safe place where kids come, and sometimes they really disclose and open up some things that maybe they wouldn't have if they wouldn't have been removed from their environment. So, and it is a great alternative for hospitalization. Again, with like any program, there's bumps along the way, and, unfortunately there's some kiddos who will probably try to utilize it a little more frequently if they need to, and then we have to, we kind of have to set boundaries around that. But definitely a great alternative to, a kid being put in a police car for not doing anything wrong and, having to travel 5 and 6 hours to a hospital without family. Then some of these other services, earlier I said direct services, these are some of the things that, we're right there, we can help connect these kids to because we're there. We're in the schools being able to do these things. But sometimes we're able to connect families to these indirect services that my agency provides, such as case management. Maybe a family needs help kind of coordinating and being linked to other services. So, they might be assigned a case manager. Maybe they need an outpatient therapist. Maybe they need to see our doctor. Maybe the family wants to look at medication options for their kid. Maybe there's some in-home needs for the family. So we have counselors who will go into the home. And so it just opens up a door to wrap services around kids instead of just, and honestly, there's some families who will say, you know what, you fix the problem at school. I'm fine with any service as long as I don't have to do anything. And so sometimes day treatment is that gateway to getting families on board with other services, and then we can put that safety net around them, because maybe after they get used to the counselor, they think, oh, this isn't too bad. The counselor may then be able to say, well, would you consider, have you thought about this? And the family, sometimes will say, okay, yeah, I think that would be helpful. And they're at a better place to be able to accept that help than perhaps where they were. And then, I could go, I don't know how I am on time. I'm good, or I need to wrap it up. Okay, so I'm not going to go into all these other services, but all that to say is, being able to partner with the school system, it just allows us to meet kids where they are, meet kids and families where they are, because that's where they spend most of their time. And a lot of times that is just a place that then we can reach out and provide those supports that they need to. And I liked this slide just because partners for success, and I'm going to steal from Ecclesiastes where it says 2 are better than 1 because they have a greater return for their work. If one falls down, the other's there to help them up. And I feel like that's, I know that's my job. My job is to take care of Dr. Peregrine, Dr. Ratliff, and their principals to make sure that their kiddos are getting what they need. And I think the only way that we can really do that well in our community is if we're partnered together and working together. So I'm done. I'll put my slide up here, Crystal Miller. My email's up there. Feel free to email me if you have questions or if there's something that you wanted to learn more about. I'm definitely open to addressing concerns or questions that you all might have. Thank you all.
Lots of good stuff going on. We're just going to distribute a template that we had planned to use, but we're running low on time. But what I was going to recommend was, in this particular template, you can put your challenge in the middle, and then you can brainstorm potential partners. Remember that untapped potential we talked about earlier, and we were going to have an opportunity to have that discussion. But I'm looking at the time. Gina, would you rather us offer opportunities for questions rather than, okay, since we just have, about 5 minutes? My watch is always fast. So why don't we open it up for questions? If you have questions for the group, we'll give you this template, but we'll be glad to answer any questions at this time.
Yes, I just want to know, could you explain some of the details of your Chick-fil-A Leadership Academy?
The Chick-fil-A Leadership Academy, great. Mrs. Hatchett, I knew I'd get you on stage before it's over with. I told her I want her to talk about Chick-fil-A because she's been more involved in that.
We were actually very fortunate in that our local Chick-fil-A manager approached us. However, this is a program that every Chick-fil-A manager is encouraged to have in their store. So if they haven't approached you, you need to approach them. It's completely free to the school division. You just need a teacher who will sponsor the group. They come in and they do leadership workshops once a month with your students. They do an international service project, which is what you saw in the picture. Our students were putting together rice food bags to be sent overseas, and the manager was actually in the picture with them. He comes and does the project with them. Then they also work as a group to devise a community service project, and it's typically a year-long planning process, and then they implement within the community. So we have that at both of our high schools just because our Chick-fil-A manager approached us and said, hey, are you interested? But Chick-fil-A has already built out the curriculum, so your teacher who sponsors does not really have to do anything other than to say, this is when we're going to meet, and these are the days and times. They have student leaders, and then Chick-fil-A brings in everything you need. And they feed the kids Chick-fil-A a few times a year when they come together.
It's a big deal, by the way.
Yes.
Thank you. That was our student, but again, they did come to us, but the nice thing about it was we were working on student leadership already because we feel strongly about student leadership, and it worked out very nicely. So go talk to your Chick-fil-A owners and managers. Great program. Other questions?
Thanks a lot, Jared. And this is for Crystal, I guess, or anybody. We were just talking about therapeutic day treatment the other night, actually, and the question came up, are parents of students ever eligible as part of that treatment? Because sometimes we're dealing with issues at home that parents are actually part of the issue.
I'll pass it to them, but I wanted to mention that the First Offender Program has a parent component. The parent has to participate in the counseling sessions with the students for 8 weeks.
Parents, they're not eligible for day treatment service. That is specifically for the kids. However, a component of the day treatment, and really what is required for from the Department of Behavioral Health, is that there is family, they call it family contact. They don't say family counseling. And so the family has got to be engaged somehow. They've got to be supportive. They've got to be on board. Now, we also know that families are not always compliant. They're not always cooperative. But if a kid is in day treatment, then the counselor is always assessing what are the needs of this family, or should be assessing what are the needs of this family, and then helping connect them to those appropriate needs and resources that they need. So it's not an element of the service itself, but definitely should be something that is considered as part of the service. And honestly, sometimes a child could be denied the service at school if a family is not doing what they need to be doing over a period of time. And so, definitely that is something probably within the last year that we've really, really tried to emphasize to families when they're signing up that, there are requirements on your part in this, because, the reality is we can do all these interventions at school, but then they go home. So if there's not going to be any change at home and there's no intervention there, are we really going to see lasting change at school? I mean, I would argue probably not, because the system's not changing.
All right, great job. And I think if I took anything away from that session, it was brainstorm with your board members about how many different things you might not be doing already. There are 100 different ways to do things, and if we all put our heads together, we can come up with great partnership ideas, I think. All right, as you go to your break, please direct your attention to the BPA table next to registration. They have provided our healthy snack break for this conference, and please be back in your seats at 10:45. Thank you. From Maribel Simra, Associate Director at the Office of Student Services, Virginia Department of Education, on best practices to address mental health in our schools. Please welcome Maribel to the stage.
Thank you all for having me here today. I am very pleased to be able to share with you some of the work that the Virginia Department of Education is doing around supporting mental health in schools. I will spend the next few minutes talking to you about the Virginia Tiered Systems of Support, which is a framework that we use to provide supports to students, and very specifically our efforts around how to incorporate mental health supports within that existing framework. I also want to share with you, after I talk about VTSS, some efforts that we have around a pilot project called Project Aware that is being implemented in 3 of our school divisions that are really piloting the work around incorporation of mental health supports within VTSS. Okay, so I'm going to start out by just sharing with you a little bit of context as to why should we be worrying about mental health. I heard a couple of folks already address this in the last presentation, so I will be brief. The first key point is that we have large number of students that need our help or need these type of supports. We know that 1 in 5 students will exhibit symptoms of a mental health disorder sometime during their K through 12 years in schools. So we have a large percentage of our population that we know are going to need those supports. We also know that between 20 and 25% of students that display those needs actually get seen for them or receive any kind of help for them. So we have large number of kids that need assistance and display mental health needs. We also know that the vast majority of them are not getting those needs met. Now, out of those that 20 to 25% that are getting those needs met or are seeing somebody, 75% of those are actually already happening in schools. So in other words, schools have become the de facto mental health system for kids. This is really where most children and adolescents are receiving services anyway. So that's another one of those key ideas. We know that schools, which is a very natural place for students to receive these supports, is typically where they are. But most of the students are actually not receiving the supports that they need, the ones that need them. Another key idea that I want to want you to take away from this context is really that unaddressed mental health needs leads to poor outcomes. We know that when we have those mental health needs that are not addressed, we have students that are at an increased risk for dropout. They're in an increased risk for disciplinary actions, not just referrals to the office, but suspensions and expulsion. And ultimately, they're also at an increased risk for involvement with the juvenile justice system. So we know that addressing those needs are really, really important if we're looking at those long-term outcomes. Earlier, we heard from Crystal that talked about all the baggage that our kids come to school with. And I think that was really important to think about because we know not just when it comes to mental illness or mental disorders that we have a large number of students that may have those. We have a lot of students that are exposed to different kinds of trauma. We have students that may have been exposed to community or family violence. We may have students that may be victims themselves of physical or emotional abuse. We have substance abuse in communities. We have she talked about the big T and little t. We have, especially now, we hear a lot about those single incidents, big traumatic events. We have natural disasters, all these things that really impact the social emotional health of our students. And we know that if those go unaddressed, they're really not going to be able to learn. So not only do we have these negative long-term outcomes to worry about, but really we know that it's affecting their academic achievement, our number one mission in school. They're not going to be able to learn if we do not address these. I really like this quote, and I wanted to share this with you, really because I think sometimes the conversation when we start talking about addressing mental health in schools, it gets a little tricky, and sometimes we wonder about that line between our role as educators in addressing and teaching our children and the role of that mental health system and really as treatment providers for those students. Like, where is that line? I think that is a concern that many of us sometimes have. And for me, this really speaks to this quote: good mental health is not simply the absence of illness, but also the possession of skills necessary to cope with life's challenges. For me, when I start thinking about good mental health being about skills that can be taught, then it really becomes easier to see what our role as educators should be. If we really truly can identify the skills that are needed for our students to be mentally well, to be ready to learn, to have those positive social, emotional, and academic outcomes, then we know that we can address those if we can teach those in school and incorporate that as part of school. I say all this, and by no means do I think that we need to do it alone, that it's only the school's job. But I think this is why we started. This is almost the underlying assumption that the Virginia Department of Education is coming to, that it is part of our mission to address these needs. But how do we go about doing it in an effective and efficient way? Traditionally, and not if you hear some of the wonderful examples that came before me this morning, but traditionally when we see schools addressing mental health needs, we have had those types of support services, if they do exist in schools, be run pretty independently or siloed from the overall school structure, meaning that you may have particular individuals in the school, specialized instructional support personnel, so individuals like your school social workers, your school psychologists, your school counselors, that may be doing some work around supporting these students, but it may not be comprehensive or aligned to the entire system of support. Or you may also have community providers that are coming into the school to provide those services, but the outcomes may not be aligned with what the school is looking to do. So the Department of Ed, we looked at this and thought of the way to address it would be to anchor it to an assistant framework that we have, and that is the Virginia Tiered Systems of Support. And I don't know how many of you, can I just get a show, how many of you are familiar with VTSS? Okay. Oh, wow, that's wonderful. So the Virginia Tier System of Support, this is something that has been an initiative of the department that has been in place for over 5 years, and really even longer if you think about its predecessors, which is the Response to Intervention Project and the Effective School-Wide Discipline Project, or PBIS, Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports. What we did about 5 years ago is we looked at these two frameworks for addressing academics and behavioral supports and realized that a lot of those key features or components were very similar. So it would make a lot of sense to put them together and support schools in doing it in an integrated way. So then a couple of years ago, we started thinking about this and said, well, you know, if we're creating or working with divisions to really implement this comprehensive system that they use to make decisions around the supports that are needed in a school, then why can't we use this very same system to try to address mental health in a comprehensive way? So that's when we started our work around really incorporating these mental health supports. Now, a lot of the information that I'm going to share with you next around how we're trying to align those services, this is a lot of work that we're doing right now to try to enhance our trainings, our coaching, our professional learning to support divisions around this more comprehensive framework. And it's being piloted in just 3 divisions right now. So this is something that if your division is in VTSS, it's not really rolled out quite yet. So we don't have a lot of our outcomes related to just the implementation of VTSS by itself. Does not speak to the mental health component added, but that I will be sharing later about Project Aware, which is the ones that are actually piloting this mental health work. Okay, so when we talk about VTSS, we often start out seeing triangles, those tiers of intervention, but I would argue that these circles actually speak much better to what VTSS actually is. VTSS, this is what I call the way of work, and it is a logic that we use at every single tier of intervention. So if you look at the outside circle, this is about student outcomes. So the framework, because it is a framework and not specific practice or a specific program, it's all about affecting student outcomes. So when you look at that large circle, that purple outcomes, we can choose whatever outcome you may want to be thinking about. So for example, positive social emotional functioning, or decreasing suspensions, or increasing reading achievement. So this logic applies to any kind of outcome. But we argue that in order to impact that outcome or to make the change that you want, it's not just about the practices. It's not just about the interventions or the programs that we put in place. Those are important, and they're reflected down there by that blue circle. We know our practices, those evidence-based strategies and programs that we put in place are critical to support our students, but they're not enough. It's really a critical interaction between those practices that are put in place, the data that is being used to support decision making, and the systems that are being put in place to support the adults in the building, those individuals that are actually implementing those practices. It is that interaction between those 3 components that is really critical to actually make a change in outcomes. We find, particularly when we first start working with schools or school divisions, is that most folks are really focused on wanting to know the practices. They really want the strategy. Tell me what to do. What can I put in place to really make a difference? More often than not, they already have lots of practices, lots of strategies, lots of programs in place that are pretty good. They may just be lacking that match to data, and they might not really be meeting the exact need that their data is telling them that it actually should be meeting. So we have difficulties with data. More often than not is really that systems piece. It's around, are we training those teachers? Are we training those adults that are actually implementing those practices? Are we providing them with enough time to be able to implement those practices with fidelity? Are we supporting, we talked about family engagement in the earlier presentation. So those systems pieces, we know we can put practices in place to support the students, but who else do we need to support to create that comprehensive model? So providing training to teachers, community members, and families, that's all part of the systems piece, and all of that is really necessary in order to impact those outcomes. here come the triangles, because we can't really talk about tiered systems of support without them. And since I know that most of you are familiar with them, I will go through these pretty quickly. But basically the tier structure, the VTSS, refers to first and foremost tier 1, which is what we call the universal or core supports. These are things that we would do for everybody in the school building. We would expect that if in a healthy system, in a system that is working, we would want about 80% of the students that are responding well to universal supports. Now, universal supports typically are not the same from school to school to school. We know, because it is, again, that interaction around systems, practices, and data, we know based on data that most schools will need slightly different universal supports to be effective. So it is all around finding what are the practices that are matched to my data to make it so that 80% of the students are actually responding well to this, to our universal supports. Tier 2 goes over Tier 1, meaning that in addition to universal supports, there are going to be students that are going to need additional supports, whether they're academic, behavioral, social-emotional, mental health. These are targeted supports, usually delivered in small groups, usually based on skill instruction. For academics, this might look like reading intervention groups, math intervention groups. For behavior, we often have mentoring systems, check-in, check-out systems, social skills instruction. For mental health, we may have things like social-emotional anger management groups, grief counseling, grief groups, things like that. So these are those targeted supports that go above and beyond what is universal for students that are not responding or doing well, but just the universal supports. And finally, we have intensive supports. These are more individualized. As you see, supports become more and more intense as you go up the pyramid, and they layer over each other, meaning that you want to make sure that students continue to receive those lower level of supports as they get into the more intensive supports. The goal here is to have about 0 to, or it'd be nice to have 0, but about 5% of the population would need intensive supports. If you are in a school, and this is a problem that we get to quite often, is we have 25% of our students that actually need intensive support. The tiered logic would then go back to, then we need to really bolster our universal supports or our targeted supports if our intensive supports are being overwhelmed, because we know we don't have the resources to intervene in an intensive, individualized way with more than 5% of our school population. So it's all about how you allocate those resources. So why did we think about incorporating mental health in this tiered system of support? Well, we know, for one, that often when we have students that have mental health needs or display difficulties in this area, that is not the only area that they actually need help with. More often than not, they're also experiencing academic difficulties, or they're experiencing behavioral difficulties. So looking at them in a comprehensive way, in a structure where you have multidisciplinary teams looking at how a student is performing, not just to support those mental health needs, but really looking at what types of supports might be needed for academics, what types of supports might be needed for behavior. So looking at it in a comprehensive way might be a little bit more efficient, rather than have different teams of individuals or different professionals working with them at different times. We also know, and this is, I think, an important part of it, that we have found that if we align, there is an expectation in a tiered system of support that we progress monitor and we evaluate outcomes, and we do this very frequently because we want to know, is what we're doing working? Do we need to continue to have those supports in place, or do we need to add or intensify more support? So there's a lot of, as a data-driven framework, there's a lot of data, there's a lot of monitoring, there's a lot of really focusing on fidelity. Is this happening? Is it being intervened with the way that we would want it to? So adding mental health supports within this framework really helps us ensure that we are aligning those outcomes. So even when we have, and we have our community providers that are partners in this work, that they still all are in that same system of evaluating, is this working? if we are spending time, and often instructional time during the day, if the services are being delivered in the school, to address mental health needs, we want to make sure that the outcomes that we all care about are actually being monitored, and then there is a difference. And through this system, this allows us to do that. So what might this look like in school buildings? So what I'm going to share with you is these are some examples of practices that you may see. These are practices and some systemic interventions that you may see by tier in some of the schools that we work with. Now, by no means do we think that all of these practices need to be put in place at once. So these are just some examples of things that we know have worked in the past. Social emotional learning curriculum for all. So we have been looking very closely at that. One of our pilot school divisions is actually implementing this. They're implementing a social emotional curriculum as their tier 1 practice in their school. So what this means basically would be to identify those social emotional skills that we want to learn for students to be able to be successful and teach those embedded within classroom instruction. So that would be one possible practice. Teaching teachers to be aware of mental health issues, or teaching teachers about trauma and what are some of the risk factors related to that, what are some trauma-sensitive practices. This is what we would call a systemic intervention, meaning that we are doing something to address those adults that are supporting the students. So even though it's not a direct intervention with students, having that increased training and awareness for teachers and other adults that work with our students is usually an important component of this work. Simple things, just like adding physical activity breaks. This is something that we have seen consistently being reported as an evidence-based practice that is having really good results to help students de-escalate and calm down. That is just a good practice that is good for all. And that may not fit with everybody or every school schedule, but some schools are trying that as a particular intervention. Providing calm zones, sensory opportunity to manage anxiety. We know that often students that may have difficulty would benefit from having an area where they can go to calm down. There's usually a lot more support or strategies around how to use them, but having the availability of these zones within schools can be a universal practice. This is something that we have, not division-wide, but we do have one of our schools, one of our elementary schools in particular, that this is something that just the whole building really bought into, so we have that availability in every classroom. So it's not targeting one particular student, it's available for all, and just having that has been proven to be helpful. Again, these are not all practices that you would implement at one time. In VTSS, we don't come with, these are the specific practices that you have to put in place, but we help divisions identify possible practices that have proven to be effective, help you look at your data to identify where are your needs, what are the areas that need to be targeted, to help you decide what might be some of the practices that you would put in place. This are some examples of what an expanded tier 2 or the supplemental or targeted supports. This is really where we see those collaborative partnerships with our community providers really come in place, along with really working with our specialized instructional support personnel, so our school counselors, our school psychologists, our school social workers, to try to see, okay, so what are the menu of services, what is the continuum of interventions and supports that are going to be available in our school buildings. And again, those practices don't have to be the same in every school building, but there should be a school-wide knowledge of what those supports and services are and how one can actually access them. And that is particularly true for mental health supports, because sometimes access of these supports is really limited to the folks that actually know how to get to them. So by providing them within this overall school structure of supports, then you make sure that every teacher can utilize this particular structure to access the supports that are available at the school. So these, again, would be interventions such as particular skill building activities for students that are at risk, social skills groups, anger management groups, mentoring programs. We also here would have parenting or community classes really geared towards a particular issue. So for example, if you're in a community has experienced high degree of community violence, for example, engaging the community in training around that or discussions around that, this would be more of an at-risk or a tier 2 systemic intervention. And finally, our tier 3 expanded intensive individual supports. This really, again, is where we see a lot of that need to collaborate and work very closely with our community providers and really developing that seamless system by which it's not just the provision of services in school, but there are going to be times where the services that are needed are really beyond the scope of the school, or even provision of school-based services by community providers. So we're going to need to have a referral out. And this sounds fairly simple, but we do know that in the slide that I showed earlier, that when we refer students for services, very few of them actually access them. So part of our tier 3 work is around that case management. How do we make sure, how can we follow up to make sure that these students, if we do need to refer out, are actually accessing those services? And you heard a wonderful example earlier. Crystal talked about therapeutic day treatment services. Therapeutic day treatment service, within the VTSS world, we would look at that as a tier 3 intervention, and we have usually providers as partners in these multidisciplinary teams. So when we're tracking the progress of students, that might be one particular practice or intervention that we put in place. But typically at tier 3, for these individualized plans, we're really looking at a comprehensive set of supports and services that any particular student may be getting. So TDT might be one piece of it for a particular student, but we might have a family intervention in place as well. We may have other supports, but we have a whole team that is coordinating the provision of those supports and services. So we don't have multiple individuals, and we're also tracking their progress. Here I wanted to switch a little bit and start talking about trauma, because I think that I don't want to call it a buzzword. I think trauma has been around for a very, very long time, and there's an awful lot of research about trauma that has been around for a very, very long time. But we are getting more and more questions about how are we addressing trauma. And within VTSS, we really look at trauma as a component of addressing social, emotional, or mental wellness needs of our students. So really falls within the very same structure. So when we address schools and we talk to them about, we have schools that say, okay, we want to become trauma sensitive. What does that really mean? We talk about it not really being anything separate. It's not a separate program or something separate that you need to do, but it's something that really falls within the structure of what you already do. So it may be about enhancing that structure. It may be additional practices that you may be putting in place. But you really want to think of it the very same way of tiering your supports. You're going to have universal supports to help you become a trauma-sensitive school, trauma-sensitive practices. And you're going to have trauma-informed interventions that your specialized instructional support personnel or your community providers or both are actually delivering if that intensity need is there. If you read, now these are some of our key points that, or some of the key points that usually come up about implementing trauma-sensitive schools. And if you read through those, it should sound pretty familiar because those are very, very consistent with tiering supports and services and really providing that full continuum of supports. So again, thinking about that trauma work, we don't really want to think of it as a separate program, just really want to embed that within the framework. So what we have started doing is going back to all of our trainings, and for those of you that have been familiar with those, we provide trainings on, say, universal practices for schools, and we have a series of 5 days of training. So we are embedding examples of using trauma-sensitive practices in every single one of those. So when we present and train schools on using or how to select or how to put these supports in place, we want to make sure that we're using that language so they can know that this is not something separate, that this is all can fall within the very same framework. Here we pulled a few of the key features related to trauma-sensitive schools, and we organized it on the VTSS way of work. So you will see that under practices, we have prioritized social and emotional skills through both academic and non-academic strategies. These are all practices that typically when you look at how do we become a trauma-sensitive schools, you will have things in place that speak to fostering those connections with families and community, promoting plays and breaks, we talked about those. So these are all fall within that world of practices. Similarly, we know there's an awful lot of training, and this is probably the biggest place where we're focusing right now. There's a lot of work needed around the systems piece, meaning that our teachers, our school staff, our communities, our parents really need ongoing support, coaching, professional learning about what is trauma, what is the possible impact of that, what does it look like in the classroom, how does it make a student react differently, how does my behavior impact students. When I approach somebody and there's close physical space, a student that has experienced some trauma may react to that pretty strongly. So you need to be able to understand some of those factors that they really may affect or escalate behavior. So those systemic interventions in particular for trauma are really going to be very important for your teachers and staff that work with students. Again, data that supports our decision making to figure out what things we need to put in place in the schools is also very important. We have, we're having that's probably one of the areas where we're struggling right now to try to identify which data points to really use to try to identify our trauma-related needs. This is where I really see the help of our community providers of being really critical. There's a lot of community data out there that we're exploring to try to figure out what is being really predictive, what is really being helpful. I know that the Department of Health, through their FACT board, which is the Family and Children's Trust, has a community and domestic violence database that is fantastic and really is able to drill down by locality and give you rates of referrals to CPS, for example, violence incidents, law enforcement touches related to those issues. So it really gives us that community perspective. We've also looked at nurses' office visits as possible data sources. So this is one place where we're doing a lot of work to try to, and we're piloting different divisions or looking at really different data sources to try to figure out, where can we find really good targeted information to help us match our interventions to the supports that are needed. Some divisions I know conduct youth risk behavior surveys, for example. I know one of our divisions is using that as their primary data source. So there's a lot of data out there. It is just about figuring out what is the most informative and how can we use it to help drive our practices. And again, this is just a list of common features to help you, and I'm good. A list of common features between what we think of as the VTSS framework, and when you read about implementing trauma-sensitive schools practices, you see that there's a number of areas, key areas that are really, really critical. We've spoken a lot about collaboration. This morning, the importance of family and community engagement. We're not saying anything new. I think one of the things that our schools really struggle with is this idea that you're asking us to do more and more and more and more. That is why we turn to this framework, and that is why we help divisions in this way to try to really organize what they do already under a single way of work. And then it just becomes much more effective and efficient because it helps you see that you may not really need to implement any additional practices. Or more often than not, you may have too many practices that you're putting in place and spending resources on that are actually not working. But by using that data, that helps you make decisions about what is working, what is not, and can we discontinue, and are there any gaps, any additional things that we do need to put in place to address the needs comprehensively, the needs for all in a universal way, or the needs of more specific students in a targeted or individualized way. And again, I think this slide just refers to that need for collaboration, and that there are going to be times where, and through this process, I want to make clear that we do want to collaborate and partner and work together with community providers. These community providers are sitting at the table with our school leadership teams, with our advanced tier teams, which are often, I heard talk of student assistance programming. So we use that very same model. We call it a little bit different. Every division calls it a little bit different. But again, it's all about the individualized problem-solving teams. We just align them so they're looking at that student comprehensively, and not just from that mental health component, but are looking at it academically and behaviorally as well. So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to share with you about Project Aware. So this is all what we know we're trying to integrate into our framework, but we were fortunate enough to receive funding from SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration, to really pilot this and figure out what might it look like in schools and what possible outcomes we could have. So that's our Project Aware. We selected 3 divisions to work with. Those are Fairfax County. They, as you know, they're very, very large, and we're only working with them in 5 high schools, so it's one particular region. But Montgomery County and Pulaski County, and we are working with them division-wide. So we have 3 fairly different school divisions that we're working with to try to pilot this and see how it works. Now, here are some lessons learned from that project. We are right now in implementation year 3 of that project. We have 2 more years to go. So the ultimate goal for that project is that the lessons that we have learned, we can incorporate in our VTSS framework as a whole. And we can go ahead and roll out training and professional development to divisions to help inform how to do this well, how to align these mental health services within that comprehensive framework. So these are preliminary. These are the things that we have noticed so far that we know we need to focus on a little more. First one is this realization, and I think we knew this ahead of time, but didn't realize how different we can be until we really started working very close together. The education system and the mental health system are different. And we have different ways of measuring outcomes. We have different language sometimes. So we realized that we spent a lot of the early, what we call the installation phase, or our exploration, our really early phase of implementation, spending time with our partners to really develop a common understanding of what was what, making sure we understood each other's systems really well. We developed not necessarily shared language. That was our initial goal. First, we said, we need to have shared or common language. Ultimately, we realized that we just needed to have a common understanding of what we meant by different terms. So terms like screening or diagnosis, they mean very different things within the school system as it might mean in mental health system. So we, again, provide working really closely together to find that common ground is very important and takes quite a bit of time. Common outcomes was a really big challenge. And I think if we have big picture outcomes, I think we all want the very same thing. We want our students to do well and be healthy and be well. How that gets measured is very, very different in schools as opposed to when we first started working with our community providers. So coming to understanding, so how are we going to measure progress? How are we going to determine this is working, this is not working in a way that makes sense to both the education system and the mental health system was work that we really had to do. Communication protocols, again, I think this really seems like common sense, but it took us a little while to figure out that those links of communication really needed to be strengthened. We have partners that some of our pilot divisions had partnerships that had been established and had been in place for a very long time. And that was part of the reason why they were selected to pilot this work, because they already had those existing relationships. But when you are working together towards a common outcome, it was surprising to us to find how much work needed to be done around establishing protocols for communication to ensure that even though you're in the building, that everybody is always on the same page. So how do we all know how the student is progressing? And if something's happening and if that student hits a bump on the road, how do we make sure that everybody that supports that student, because it's all about those comprehensive services. So not just the counselor or not just the community provider that is working with that student, but that English teacher, that math teacher, that counselor that may be seeing the nurse if he's going, or if they have a mentor, which may be the media specialist. How do we create those communication protocols to ensure that it really is a wraparound supported system for that student? And another big one that we're still really working on is that interaction between our school-based, school-employed, specialized staff, our school psychologists, our social workers, our school counselors, and our community providers. All of them really critical to this work. All of them very confused as to where their role, like where do I fit, in which part, where do I provide services? So we had to do a lot of work around that. And again, it's not about dictating this is where you fit, but it's about what makes the most sense for each school based on the resources that they have. And how do you make sure that that is clear to everybody that is providing those services so we can be efficient and there's really no duplication of services. Now, finally, I wanted to share with you some of the outcomes that we're seeing for Project Aware. Again, we are in year 3 of implementation, so most of these data points are specifically from the end of last school year, so the 2016-2017 school year. We've seen a pretty significant increase in the number of students that are receiving services. So again, that makes sense. From year 2015 to 2016 to the 2016-2017 school year, the second year we served 3,184 students, which is again a 53% increase of students that are receiving supports in the schools. So and this is again both by school-employed providers along with community mental health providers. So it's about school-based services. These are referrals, so we know that not every service that we can, that a student may need can actually be delivered in school-based, regardless of who the provider is. So these are our referral rates, not rates, but the number of students that were referred out to receive services. So we know that over 7,800 students were linked to a mental health provider or resource outside of the school. And I think the number that is probably, or the percentage that is the most powerful here is that 72% of the students that were referred to those community resources actually was able to access those resources, which is really, really high if we look at what national data is telling us what the average is. Now, it is hard for us to actually compare to what a baseline was because this is not data that was being collected prior to implementation, and we find that most schools are not collecting these type of data because they are not tracking students actually accessing those services or not. But once we started tracking that, we realized that by this second year, we had 72% of those referrals. So these are, again, on top of the services that are already being delivered in school. When we cannot handle it in school and we have to refer out, almost 3/4 of our kiddos are actually being served, which is fantastic. Although it's still room for growth. We also see a very significant increase. So we talked a lot about allocation of resources and practices that you can put in place. We've seen a drastic increase on the number of evidence-based practices that are actually being used in these pilot divisions. One of the things that we found when we first started working with them is that there were lots of good, interesting things going on already. We had school psychologists, school counselors, school social workers that were planning out interventions, but none of them were particularly aligned to the data that the school had, and they were primarily based on either their personal expertise or what they had. They went to a conference and got some really good information and sounded really good. They might try that at their schools. Similarly, they already had a lot of community providers that were working and supporting, but the schools did not really know. They knew they were getting therapeutic day treatment services, but they don't really know exactly what that meant or what the service actually looked like, or was it evidence-based. So when we started tracking this information, and then we started pruning and prioritizing, okay, so what services are we actually going to implement, and are those evidence-based, and can we track the effectiveness of them? We saw this drastic increase in the number of practices that were being used. Along with an increase, and that 41% speaks to an increase in the number of student assistance program team members. Again, and I think this speaks to really getting the school more involved in the student assistance program, and Crystal Miller spoke about this earlier, but this is a structure for those individualized support, that Tier 3 supports, a structure that we use to try to identify and follow those students. We saw that before those structures did exist, but they were pretty limited. We had usually, a counselor, a provider, maybe a coordinator, and a teacher that might be part of it. Now they're much more comprehensive, so we have specialists from other areas that are really looking at that student more holistically. And finally, the final effort around that Project Aware is doing is not just related to those 3 pilot divisions, but we receive funds to really engage in a pretty wide systemic intervention, and that is the implementation of youth mental health first aid training. Youth mental health first aid is an evidence-based 8-hour training that is designed for any adult really that comes in contact with children, to get them to be aware, recognize the signs and symptoms of mental health problems, and learn how to refer out to somebody who might be able to assist. And by refer out, I don't mean a formal referral, but to reach out to that school counselor or school psychologist or community partner that's in the school. So identify what is in their building in order to hook up that student with services. Since the start of the grant, we have been able to train over 3,300 teachers, and this is not just limited to those 3 divisions. We've actually trained individuals in 39 school divisions. And we've also developing trainers. So we have 28 new trainers at the state, and these are all educators. We have a partner effort with the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services that is doing it. So we have a lot of trainers at the CSBs already that are able to provide the support. Ours is very focused on the schools, so our trainers are school personnel that can really understand that school system. So again, this is something that is available to anybody that is interested in having this training. We provide the trainers, we provide the materials, and you just provide the people that need to be trained, and that's it. But I think this has been a pretty massive effort, and we are really pleased with the level of impact that we've had so far with the state, and we have 2 more years left of this grant opportunity, so we really do hope to be able to get to that 5,000 number by the end of the 5 years. And that is all I have for now. There is my contact information up on the screen. I also put Joanne Burkholder, who's our director of the Office of Student Services, who was scheduled to be here today, but she's very sorry she could not join. She's unfortunately is dealing with a pretty significant illness, so could not be here. But that's our contact information. If you have any questions regarding our work at the department related to providing mental health supports or VTSS, please do not hesitate to contact us. And I don't know if we have a little bit, maybe a couple of minutes for questions.
So we're from Montgomery County, one of your pilot programs. Pulaski's sitting right over there. Have to point them out too. And I think the first thing I would say is absolutely, if you can do this, do this. It's been a wonderful experience for us. our chair here has actually been to the training, so she's one of your trained. Yes.
Excellent.
And next Tuesday night, we'll be in board session, but there's a presentation because we're the county using the youth risk behavior survey you mentioned as well. It's another thing I would highly recommend. It's shocking. It's a little scary when you get the results, but you really should understand what your students are doing and thinking and dealing with, and the risky behavior that they're engaging in, and the percentages at which they're doing it. It's really scary. Our biggest concern, so we have 2 more years of the grant. We're going to have a lot of people trained. We're going to have a lot of things in place. So for us, it'll be a matter of how do we continue this? How do we continue to fund these people? We're fortunate. We have a lot of those community services you talk about that were already in place. How do divisions, particularly out here in Southwest Virginia, how are they going to do this with, as we know, the limited funding we're looking at? And how is VDOE going to support that?
That is a really great question, and it's one of our biggest concerns regarding how to replicate the success of Project Aware. One of our first plans is really around what can we learn from your experience that we can replicate with funding reallocation. As you are probably aware, for divisions that participate in VTSS, other than the 3 Project Aware divisions, when divisions participate in VTSS, it really comes with no funding. What it means to participate in VTSS is all about the training that you receive and ongoing coaching that you receive in order to do this work. So some of what we're trying to do is figure out what information are we learning from implementation that we can go ahead and embed into our trainings, and how can we prepare our coaches to help support some of that work in other divisions in a way that doesn't cost significant amount of money. I think the issue that you speak to more specifically is around funding individuals that can actually provide these services. And I think that this is something that is going to be a constant struggle. As you may know, our Board of Education last year recommended to our General Assembly that we establish minimum ratios for school psychologists, school social workers, and lower the ratios for counselors, because it is, again, that recognition from our board is saying, for us to really be able to do this work and do this work well, we really not only need the collaborative partnerships, but we also need more in-house personnel that is able to do this work. So that did not translate to those ratios being put in place, and I know funding is a big concern, because even if that does come in place, how do we, and that's part of the reason why it's not going in there, how do we help pay for those individuals? So I do know there's a number of different what I would say, it's nonprofits or private organizations that are working with our legislators to give ideas around what if we pilot this in a bigger scale to be able to, again, really show the outcomes. Right now we have very preliminary outcomes, and we don't really have baseline data just based on the way that we were that we really track the effectiveness of this. So what our hope is really to try to expand with really looking at state funding, expand our pilot efforts with more specific, probably not to the scale that the AWARE federal funds were able to do, but if we can do it in a greater number of divisions with more specific components where we can get outcomes that we can show with more specific strategies, I am hopeful that that will then translate to that next step. But absolutely, I know we have those conversations around sustainability with our 3 divisions constantly. And in the short term, I can tell you, I know we're grant writing like crazy, trying to figure out other opportunities that may help, again, really provide, because it's all about the data. I think that's what everybody wants to see. Show me that this is working so I can invest in this, because theoretically, it makes sense. We have indicators that it worked, but when you put it in place, before somebody invests in it, they really want to see those outcomes. So I think that's, at my level, that's what I'm really working very hard to do, is try to continue to share the outcomes that we're seeing so that we can continue to get more and more opportunities to get even further outcomes and replicate it out a little bit further. So that's our hope.
I think some of the older members that are on the board here, and our chairman's been on the school board for 25 years, and he probably, back in the day, probably would have never thought we'd be talking about a subject like we're talking today. If my figures serve me correctly, you said that 1 in 5 students in I guess Virginia, 20%, are having some kind of mental issues, maybe?
That's a national number, but yes.
Well, I saw a figure just recently somewhere else that said 20% of the kids in this country are suffering from some type of mental disorder, and specifically depression. So that seems to me like a pretty high number. And from the figures you also showed us, it looks like the problem is maybe getting a little worse as time goes on. So what do you think, what's the problem? Why are we talking about this subject today, and maybe 20 years ago we didn't have that problem and wouldn't even thought about having a session on mental illness in schools? My take on it is, and I'm just an old country boy farmer and, not a psychiatrist, but my take on it is that we've got a bunch of kids in this country that are living in a fantasy world of video games, computers, texts, emails, and I think a lot of them I don't think a lot of them are out of touch with the reality. I had a 5th grade retired teacher tell me the other day that her last class that she taught, she said, some of these kids, they're living in a fantasy world, and they don't have a concept of what's real and what's not, and they just they can't cope. And I have 5 boys, 5 grandsons, and we live on a farm. And if they don't have time to play video games, that kind, I'll find them a job before they have a phone or an iPad in their face. And I think we have to blame the parents in a lot of cases. They allow this to happen, and the kids are just they're not in the real world, and we need to change that. My daughter is a physician, and she has a little boy that's 2 and one that's 4, and the little 4-year-old's always asking, I'm Poppy, always says, Poppy, can I have your phone? Can I have your phone? And he's playing video games, and he's looking at videos. Well, last week she caught him looking at a video that wasn't very proper for a 4-year-old. So she took the phone away, and she told me if I ever gave it to him again, I'd be on death row. And she says he will probably never get another phone until he goes to college. So I mean, I think we got to take the bull by the horns and say, hey, these kids are going to have to start learning to write a complete sentence with a noun and a verb, not speak in text you as you as you, and they communicate that way. And I just think it's gotten out of hand. And this kid in Florida playing these video games that were just kill. And there was a cartoon after this happened, and it showed up 2 parents talking, and they were saying, I don't understand what's going on in this world, all this violence and everything. And the kid was playing a video game behind him, and it was saying, kill, kill, kill. So, what can we expect? So, are we going to, at some point, have to have a therapist for every kid in our school in like 6th grade or 6th period? Okay, kids, you go to your therapy session today because you're mentally ill, or you're going to be, and you're going to shoot up a school. We're going to have to do something, and it's just scary.
Thank you for that. And I would say that I don't know about an increase in numbers. So that 1 in 5 or 20% of kids exhibiting a mental health disorder, that is a national number. I don't know if we've seen that change over time, but it's certainly a very large number. And I completely agree with you that I do think that we have current societal exposures that are really not helping the health of our students. Video games, I have 2 young boys myself, and I'm telling you, parenting a child nowadays in the world of technology is something that I think most of us parents with young kids don't really know how to do well. And there's a lot of training and support that parents would really benefit from to try to figure some of these things out. All to say that it's not a simple answer. that I think there's a lot of influences that are really affecting the mental wellness of our students. But the one thing that we know for sure is that it's there, and we have lots of kids with these needs, and they're in our schools. So hopefully we can figure out some ways that we can help support them. And, okay, thank you.
Thanks again, Maribel, and we know that it is a very complex problem and appreciate all of your insight. Dr. Thomas Brewster, Assistant Director of External Affairs for Communities and Schools of Virginia, and Quentin Brown, the State Director of Communities and Schools of Virginia, to discuss integrated student support. Please welcome Dr. Thomas Brewster.
First of all, I want to start off talking about communities and schools. We recently started a new media campaign with Sterling Brown. And I want to start off because the video does a good job of capturing probably one of our more important assets that we have in our schools, and that's our site coordinators. So I want to just show you this video before we get started.
In one word, communities and schools is connection.
Relentless.
Hope.
Humbling.
Okay, cut. Let's try one where you seem like you're happy to be here.
Humbling.
Good enough.
Like the name says, I'm bringing the power of community into schools. My job is about building one-on-one relationships that help kids write their own story and shape their future.
And I'm a celebrity spokesperson, which is also a very important role.
Because some kids come to school with adult-sized problems, we do whatever it takes to help them show up for school, focus on learning, and see their own potential for success.
My mom was a single parent and struggled to make ends meet for her children. Communities and schools provided me with food bags every week to ensure I didn't go hungry.
Ooh, my personal chef makes this amazing gluten-free pasta which tastes like it's made out of nothing but gluten. He can come make that for you outside of my eating hours.
By being in schools full-time, we see the real reasons why kids don't show up to school and can help get to the root of the problem.
We keep a closet stocked with clothing for any child that needs a new pair of shoes or a warm jacket.
Ooh, I got this tracksuit, but it's made out of bees. Wore it to the Emmys last year underneath my tuxedo. It was real tight, right? Point is, it's lightly used. You guys can have that if you want.
Like we said, we help provide the essentials.
Look, I'm just saying the thing's worth like $30,000. And I heard once the winter hits and the bees dies, it'll be like $70 million. It's not true, I made it up. I'm saying it's gonna be a lot of money.
We will make doctor's appointments for children and we'll even drive them.
Oh, like an assistant.
Yo, come on.
Well, you can use mine to grab your dry cleaning, but only if he's already out getting my dry cleaning. If you want a green juice or something, he can probably hook you up with something.
Cut.
What's up?
Okay, that's enough. Thanks so much. It's not working out, so have a good one.
You firing me?
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Nothing is more important than being there for a child.
Nothing.
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 Which is why we don't need a celebrity spokesperson. We need you.
Go to communitiesandschools.org to find out how you can help.
Getting communities to support the initiative. The goal was to improve attendance, but what they did was they did preferential parking. In other words, if you won the attendance contest, you received preferential parking on campus, which is very important. So these two young ladies, they're pictured here with a parking sign that was used to designate that parking spot. The other reason that they're on the front cover is because site coordinators are our rock stars. They're the ones who are in the building every day making the connections between students and the connections between community organizations. And they're also the ones that when teachers fill out a referral, for example, if a teacher has a student who's missed a lot, or they notice a difference in that student's behavior, then the referral process would have them reporting this information to the site coordinator, who would work directly with the child and that child's family in order to get them the things that they need most. Briefly, our story, we're about 40 years old. We really come to age as a national organization during President Carter's administration. President Carter was familiar with communities and schools in Georgia and decided to help Bill Milligan take it national. And the idea was to address the dropout rate by building one-to-one relationships with students. And the whole idea is to put someone in the building who can make that connection and who had access to external partners so that we could take advantage of what the community has to offer these students. My CIS story. And it goes back to 2006. I was teaching at Concord University. And a job came open in Pulaski, and it was to work with this guy, John Stowers. And it was in student services. It was exactly where I wanted to be. I wanted a little action and adventure. I'd been in higher ed for about 5 years and out of public schools. I'd originally served 10 years in Tazewell County. So I wanted to go back, but I wanted to go back and actually do something that not only gave me access to the central office, but also gave me access to students. So Don Stowers asked me to do one thing, and that is to connect with students who were suspended on a long-term basis. Build relationships with those students, build relationships with those families. So things went great the first 9 weeks. You know, I was out in the schools, I was meeting new students, I was getting used to, you know, the absolute wonderful resources that Pulaski County had. The problem is, once it reached 50, by midterm, it was impossible to reach all of those students alone. In other words, and my daughter said I went emoji crazy, but she said, "Dad, you've never used emojis before, have you?" And I said, "Yeah, I've used them, but you know, that's what I felt like. I felt like I was running on empty, because basically I was trying to reach all 50 of these students, going out and making school visits, you know, trying to connect with families, and it's impossible for one person to do. So we started shopping around for systems, and we started looking for a system to put in place where there's a referral process, there's a team of adults sitting around the table and working out how we can address the issues that these students bring to us on a daily basis, the non-academic issues that keep them from succeeding in the classroom. So we came up with the Student Assistance Program, and Joanne Burkholter was very helpful in assisting us with adopting a student assistance policy in the county. And we were successful after that because of our active CSB in the area. We were successful with putting student assistance counselors at the high school and at 2 middle schools. What made CIS stand out and what made community schools stand out was it was a public-private partnership. In other words, you created a 501c3 board of community partners, and those individuals went out and raised money as part of a 501c3, applied for grants in order to put these individuals in the school building, because it gets expensive. And if you don't have external help, if you don't have private money, let's face it, there's very little public money available to do this. Only so much public money to go around. So I approached Mark Emblich, who I'd served on the State Board of Education with, and Mark was the founding director of community schools in Virginia. And we asked about Southwest Virginia. Urban poverty, rural poverty, suburban poverty, it all ends up in the same results. And the result is students do not perform in the classroom up to our expectations and up to their expectations because of all these non-academic issues. So we started focusing in on Southwest Virginia. Bristol City was the school system who first expressed an interest in communities and schools. So we were able to, thanks to the help of Governor Bob McDonnell, who put us in his second biennium budget, we were very fortunate to secure the money and the funding to hire an executive director and site coordinator in Bristol. Since then, you know, we have actually expand it across the state. A lot of that due to a strategic plan that Communities and Schools of Virginia have. But for the most part, here in Southwest, we did a needs study. We did a resource allocation study before we actually went into the community and established ourselves. And these are some of the things that we work on a daily basis and that you deal with in your schools on a daily basis. These non-academic issues that impact student performance in the classroom. Lack of basic necessities. Students are hungry. They can't learn when they're hungry. When they have mental health issues and they need to get that assistance, sometimes it's hard to navigate that world, and we help parents and families do just that. And if they don't have a place to sleep, we have a large amount across the Commonwealth of homeless students that is an issue that needs to be addressed. So we have a network of 71 schools right now, and we have 7 different affiliates. Now, one of the things that we could say is we go into the communities that often have the highest needs. For example, 93% of our students, our CIS students, qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's an indicator. 85% of our schools receive Title I funding. So one of the things that Communities and Schools does is try to go where there's the most need. And you can see we're out from Hampton Roads to Southwest to Northern Virginia, New River Valley, Richmond, Chesterfield, Petersburg, and Nova. So how do we address it? Well, we have a board of community partners that oversee the organization. We have an executive director who's the image of the organization and the affiliate, who goes out and secures and raises money. We have program directors that ensure that there's fidelity with the model, with the implementation, and the site coordinators are well-trained once they're in the building, well-trained as social workers, well-trained to work with students. But at the heart and soul of that, and that's where you see the schoolhouse and the Communities and Schools logo, the heart and soul of that, it's our site coordinators. They're the rock stars. They're the ones that's in there day in, day out, working with the students, working with the families, working with the schools. We have what's called tiered support. Well, Tier 1 support means that it's a school-wide program. For example, the attendance program that was done at Richlands High School was a school-wide program. Tier 2 might be something that you see in your data. For example, in Pulaski, we had an elementary school where there were a lot of incarcerated parents. So in other words, grandparents were having to raise their children. So a few years ago, a group was created to bring those grandparents together to provide them with some assistance on what to do and how to best help their child in this new role that they have. Tier 3 is more case managed students. These are students who are managed individually, who have more significant problems than the others. We do that through case management. We keep data on those students. For example, we monitor their attendance. We monitor their behavior. We provide them with career counseling. And we also mentor and try to build a one-to-one relationship with those students. And we also try to connect them with someone in the community who can also build a relationship with that student. But you can see the site coordinator is one person, but they have a system in place. And that system allows them to connect with other people. It allows them to connect with a network. And before long, you're addressing life and social skills. You're addressing academic assistance. You're addressing college and career prep, family engagement, behavior, and your basic needs. Now, Matt Henderson. A lot of you remember Michael Dukakis' furlough program from the 1988 election. And the person you remember most out of that was Willie Horton. But the most important individual as far as New England Patriots go is a guy by the name of Mark Henderson, who was on a furlough program for Governor Dukakis. And the interesting thing about Mark Henderson was New England was getting ready to kick the last second field goal. There was snow all over the field. His job was simply to keep the sidelines clear. That's it. But instead, he went rogue and he rolled out on the field and he cleared a spot so that the kicker could have a clean place from which to kick the winning field goal. And I know you, those of you out there who are not New England Patriots fans, you're going to say, well, they've been cheating since 1982. And the answer to that is correct. They have been. So, because I guarantee no one tried to stop this guy from cleaning that spot. And that's what he did. He cleared it away. Well, I like to think of our site coordinators as that guy on the John Deere tractor, the guy who clears the path so that students can kick the field goal and be successful. And that field goal being, graduation and successful onboarding to post-secondary education. Now, the other thing, I can throw in, the offensive line being the support system and the defense being all the problems, but I don't want to insult any Dolphin fans out there. But our impact this year statewide, and we have an impact statement, we have an annual report card for each affiliate that's very similar to this. For example, we have one for Southwest, we have one for New River Valley, where we have one for all of our affiliates where we actually look at the data that's collected. And we do collect data on all of our students. We feel like that's important so that we can be successful, more successful. Because there is a portion where we actually reflect and we decide a plan of action for the next school year. But last year we served 38,478 students across the Commonwealth. Now, these could be Tier 1 services. For example, if we would do a school-wide program, that would count toward a Tier 1. And that counts toward the 38. But we also had 4,453 students across the Commonwealth who we worked with in a Tier 2 and Tier 3 support system. We collect data on the 4,453 students. Now, we collect data on our case-managed students and our students who are working with Tier 2 resources. The 38,000, we hope, has an impact on your overall school data. And the fact that we're trying to impact, students who are most at risk should also help your overall school data. Data matters. It matters when we address funders, when we fill out applications for grants. It helps when we go to the General Assembly. I know approaching the General Assembly, a lot of delegates will ask you, well, we don't necessarily want to hear stories. We want to see data because data proves that you're making an impact out in the school. So this is a good quote from Altria why they support us. And they support us because the data demonstrates the impact. But data can't stand alone because Bill Milligan says it's not programs that change lives, it's relationships. It's those one-to-one relationships. So we can't just say, use data to prove our success. We have to have those stories. We have to have students telling those stories of how CIS has impacted their life. And this is this is from AT&T, but they have the numbers to show their success. But the real stories of success from students who have benefited from the program are extremely important. So, in other words, we try to address when we approach funders and we approach individuals to talk about communities and schools, we try to address both the head and the heart. And that both are important. Data is important, but it's also important to highlight students who have gone through, who have been at risk, and CIS has helped them to graduate, helped them successfully on board to post-secondary education. But our data underscores what we do, but the stories have the most impact. And of course, all of you have experienced graduation. Graduation's the best time of the school year for administrators, school board members, faculty and staff, because the look on those students' faces as they walk across the stage, some of it is nervousness, some of it is relief, some of it is elation, but there's that look. And I've never seen someone walk across stage like this is a formality. Especially those students who have worked the hardest to get through graduation. They always have that look of excitement, and they have that look of, I've accomplished something. But we always say graduation's not the end all. we have to also assist our students with successful onboarding to some type of post-secondary academic career. So if you're interested in additional information, please do not hesitate to contact me. That's my email and phone number. And certainly it's been a privilege to have the opportunity to address you all here today. But when it comes to student support services, I'm sure a lot of you have a system in place, a referral system in place, but teachers need to have an outlet so when something goes wrong, they have someone to go to. And they have a group of people who's going to sit around the table and address that particular student's issue. Thank you.
Thanks again, Tom. Appreciate all of that great information. And I have failed to recognize somebody that I should have recognized earlier. We have with us today a guest. He has been the past president of VSBA. Bill Kidd is with us, and I would like to recognize Bill, if you'd please stand. Should have recognized you earlier this morning, so apologize for that. Place. All right, at this time, I'd like to introduce our final speaker, Aaron Dykstra, Executive Director of the Making Foundation, who will talk about learning through making. Please join me in welcoming Aaron to the stage.
Hi, how's everyone doing? You guys are witnessing me live my 13-year-old nightmare, being up here and talking to a bunch of educators, because I am certainly an outlier in this field. I dropped out of school. I have a GED. I did not go to college, and yet here I am talking to you guys. So maybe I have something of value I can share, and that's basically why I'm here. So I'll start just talking a little bit about myself and what led to me being right here. Don't have a presentation, very casual speaker. Again, I'm a novice in the education world, so bear with me, but I'll try and keep it interesting. I am from Roanoke, Virginia. Grew up there, single mom, was a little skateboard punk, and really was kind of just not meant for the school system as it was in the way that I experienced it. I did not enjoy it. I was constantly living under that cloud. Every single report card, every teacher's note always just said not living up to his potential. And that's something that I really kind of took to heart. When you hear that enough as a student, I was like, okay, well, I guess I don't live up to my potential, and that's just where I am. But I had some really great people come through my life and make a huge difference, and it ultimately led me to where I am now, and for that I'm very grateful. But after I got my GED at 15, I started working full-time at 16. I was so eager to get out of Roanoke, Virginia. I joined the military on my 17th birthday. Got out, this was in 2000. So I was in the Air Force, and then 2001, September 11th, of course, rolled around and spent a bunch of time deployed, and really did a lot of growing up during that period. Going to war, really highly recommend that for kind of fast-tracking a lot of things in your life. But I came out of that experience with a much better understanding of who I was, or who I thought I was at that period, and really benefited a lot, and was kind of opened up to a new education style in learning the way that you learn careers in the military. I worked on F-15s, and in all of my eagerness to get out of Roanoke and out of Virginia, I put all foreign bases, trying to get stationed absolutely anywhere but Virginia. I had Guam, South Korea, all the exciting ones that kind of like, if you put it on your list, you may end up there. But no, I got sent to Hampton, Virginia, which was a real kick in the pants, but it ended up being a good experience for me, and I really enjoyed being there and making some of the connections that I made there. And I did 6 years there and got out and fled to New York City. I was like, okay, well, done with that experience. Let me do something completely different. So went to New York, tried to pursue my dreams of becoming a professional musician, which, again, I'm standing here, so that kind of gives an indication of how that went. But it was fun. Again, learned a lot of things, and was able to kind of meet a lot of interesting people and gather little bits that all kind of added to the construction of who I am. So I look back at that period of, really 13-year-old skateboard punk until, early 20s being in New York as my college education.
Your funding.
Otherwise,
it was any sponsorships for like helping provide your materials?
When I really, one of the catalysts in my life, one of the kind of continuing trends that was something I was very passionate and interested in was bicycles. I transitioned from being that skateboard punk into riding mountain bikes, into racing, and then getting into road bikes. So I always had bicycles as kind of my escape. A lot of times, when things were bad at the home life, or getting kicked out of schools and all that stuff, bicycles were my therapy. That's why I got out and would be able to, living in the Blue Ridge Mountains, get out on the Parkway and just kind of pound it out and really work through some stuff. So that was a great catalyst. And when I was in New York, I was working in bike shops and I was doing events, and really did well with the events. Did some kind of big name events, and that led to a position in Chicago. I was the production manager for the Chicagoland Bicycle Federation, which is a big nonprofit there. And basically my entire year was preparing for one single event. It's the second largest bicycle event in North America. It's called Bike the Drive. They shut down Lakeshore Drive on Memorial Day, and we had 33,000 cyclists out there. So pretty big scale, and it just about broke me. It was a year's worth of work for one day, and we had an incredibly successful event, and after that I was like, okay, I need to find something else. So kind of carrying on with the bicycles, that was always something that I was very passionate about. I decided I didn't want to work in a bike shop, but I wanted to learn how to make bicycles. I really, this passion, I was like, okay, this is something that I'm interested in. Let me dig into it. So I started digging into it and realizing that, hey, I need to learn how to weld. I need to learn how to braze. I need to learn all this stuff. So I started soaking up all this knowledge, and it was stuff that was kind of readily available through YouTube. I was able to secure an apprenticeship. I went out and spent a month out in rural Colorado with Koichi Yamaguchi, he built a lot of the Olympic bikes in the 80s for the US teams. Very, very famous guy in the bike world, and he barely speaks English. It was a very Mr. Miyagi experience, but it was fantastic, and it taught me to learn by using my hands and not going off of instructions or not just listening to what someone is telling me, but actually learn by doing. And that was an incredibly powerful moment for me. That was really when light bulbs started going off. And I came back and I was like, okay, this is amazing. I want to start a company. I want to pursue this. I'm going to spend some time trying to master my craft as well as I can. So I did that, came back to Roanoke because I was in Chicago and there's no way that I could have afforded to pursue my goal there. Came back to Roanoke, bought a small house, and was able to jump in and make it happen. Spent a lot of time early on kind of practicing my craft, building bikes for friends and friends of friends, and then it started to snowball. And then I went to my first national show in 2010. At that show, I won the Best New Builder at that show, it's the North American Handmade Bicycle Show. It's a very large event in the cycling world. I was blown away. I didn't expect to win, but I was very proud of the bike that I made. And that just kind of opened the floodgates. I started getting a lot of inquiries from people that I didn't know, which was so flattering for my ego, and almost to a fault. But it was a really great experience for me that first year, and then diving in and understanding the difficulties with owning a business. And that led to the next year, and I won an award at the next year, and it went on for 4 years. In 4 years, I won 5 Best of Show awards, all under the age of 30, which was never done in that realm. So I consider myself very lucky, and I started getting a lot of accolades and doing interviews, getting magazine spreads, and all this fun stuff. And I was, basically a one-man operation in Roanoke, Virginia. I was used for like advertising purposes. Anytime a brewery was interested in coming to Roanoke, I would get trotted out, and I've actually built 3 different bikes for different brewers who did not come to Roanoke, but it was a really cool experience for me until about 6 years in, I started realizing, like, man, I'm really sick of working alone. I feel like I'm on paper having this really great impact, but in reality, all my customers are from around the world. I've got my bikes. I have a bike literally on every continent, which was such a cool thing for me. But I wasn't really having an impact in the local area. Around that time, I moved my shop. I expanded. I started a company called Hometown Manufacturing. So instead of doing fully custom bikes, I started doing more production bikes. And my new shop was in kind of a different part of town, a little bit more industrial, a little lower income. And in the summer, I had a great big garage bay. I'd open up, and I started getting neighborhood kids coming in, and they all were very interested in what I was doing. So I started to show them. I started to, teach them how to work on their bikes. They would bring their bikes over, and they, it's kind of like feeding, rats. They started showing up more and more, and I was like, okay, this is great. And I really enjoyed it. It was something that I didn't anticipate at all. And yeah, rats. Again, the novice here, so bear with me. I'm very, very off the cuff. But it was something I really enjoyed, working with these kids, which is something that I didn't anticipate. There was a lot of things that started happening all at the same time. It was very serendipitous, and that was the neighborhood kids coming in there. My company was growing. I was hitting a real max burnout of kind of, building these very high-end objects. I mean, my bikes averaged out to $8,000 to $10,000, which is something that I could never afford. And it was a very strange kind of experience to be hand-to-mouthing it, not making any money, but serving, a very elite worldwide customer base. And to no surprise to probably anyone who would look at the picture, led to burnout. As I grew my second company, Hometown Manufacturing, and started doing more and more, I got invited to the Manufacturers Summit that Virginia Western holds every year. And it was basically a meeting of the minds with all of the manufacturers in the region, trying to figure out what are we going to do. And I was just really blown away with all the profound hand-wringing of the impending silver tsunami, as they called it, is the workforce that's exiting, and there's no way of getting these kids, one of the conversations that took place is, how do we make manufacturing sexy to kids? Their words, not mine. And I was like, well, let's start with rephrasing that maybe. And secondly, it's not going to be taking these kids to see the Elizabeth Arden, conveyor belt. This isn't going to really ramp them up to be like, okay, I want to get in this field. So really identified a problem. Also at this time, which was about May of 2015, a Harvard study was published in the New York Times on upward mobility. And it highlighted Roanoke City as being amongst the worst in the nation for upward mobility. If you're born into poverty, you are 18% less likely to leave poverty than the previous generation. And that was kind of a staggering thing to me. I was like, wait a minute, why I read the paper on a regular basis. Like, why isn't this kind of thing talked about? We're doing all this to lure in manufacturers and all this, but we're not really doing a lot to ready a workforce. So I took that and started reverse engineering. Went to Virginia Western, was talking with some folks there in charge of the mechatronics program, which is basically their advanced manufacturing program that they're working. They've got multi-million-dollar grants and expanding very quickly. Some really exciting stuff going on there, but they aren't getting a lot of youth involvement there. They're getting certainly engineering-bound students that their dad was an engineer, and this is the track you're going to take. You're going to take the mechatronics, and then you'll go to Virginia Tech and go into their engineering program, and you'll be all squared away. But not a lot of other people. There are adults that are cross-training or retraining into new careers, but that was kind of the extent of it. So from there, I went to the high schools and looked at what's going on in the county at the Burton Center and in Roanoke City at Rotech, and great facilities there, really great stuff happening there. However, They, you know, the culinary arts program is completely booked up. The cosmetology is completely booked out. Coding, all these things, which are great things and great experiences for the kids. But welding, in 2015, they had 4 students graduate. And meanwhile, this, you know, the Harvard study that came out, and then if you go down Campbell Avenue in Roanoke, there are literally signs lining the road saying, we need welders. It's like, all right, well, this is just a matter of connecting dots. How can we do that? So with that, I was like, all right, if these, you know, CTE programs are at the high school level, we need to reach the kids at an earlier age. We need to kind of introduce them to a lot of this stuff before they think they know who they are, and a lot of 9th graders do. And it takes a lot of guts to go, I'm not going to go with my friend and, you know, do this culinary arts class. I'm going to go over and take cabinetry or, you know, welding, any of the more traditional skills trades that are really incredible careers to get into, truly careers and not jobs. And that's something that, you know, I identified as an issue, and how do we solve it? Right around, again, being, you know, this really serendipitous timing, I got approached, and they just found me online. Simon & Schuster reached out to me to do a kid's book under their Aladdin imprint, which was really cool for me. So I did a book called Made by Hand, and it was a year-long process of writing this book with them. And it was a really cool experience, and it unintentionally kind of laid out an initial curriculum for me. I was like, okay, all these things are happening, what can I do with it? There's something here. So I started going door to door. Originally, you know, again, novice to the education world, I was like, okay, if I'm gonna do something, it needs to be outside of the education world. So I went and started knocking on doors of manufacturers and made some really great connections. And so many manufacturers were going, we need people, we're freaking out. We've got kids that are engineering students that are coming in, and they don't know how to read a tape measure. We've really kind of have this massive gap. What can we do? How can we solve this? And I was like, well, I've got an idea. I'm not asking for money now, but I'm priming the pump and just letting you know, looking for feedback, trying to figure out what I can do to help this situation. I was blown away at the response from everyone. Everyone defined it as something that was drastically needed. And I was like, okay, well, I'm ready to make a move on this. Let's get crazy. Let's do this. So I put together a plan, got some investors that I pitched to, and I was like, hey, there's this old grocery store in a rundown part of the neighborhood. I want to buy it and turn it into a school. I want it to be a maker school. So we did that, bought it was a Save-A-Lot grocery store. It was a functioning grocery store from 1941 until 2011 when it closed down. And when it closed down, it was the highest per capita scratch-off sales ticket store in Virginia. So just to kind of paint a picture of the demographics that we were serving there. Went in there, completely rehabbed it, and wanted to make it a completely different experience. And in all of, spent about 8 months rehabbing this, kind of creating just a really good environment that felt starkly different from schools. During this period, the superintendent of Roanoke, Dr. Rita Bishop, caught wind of what I was doing, asked me to come in and kind of give a presentation, and I was happy to do so, went and let her know what I was working on, and she loved the idea and said, let's do this under 21st century. Which for me, it was like, okay, well, I'm getting involved with the school system. I'm a little iffy on that, but okay, this solves a great problem. I've got this idea. I've got, you know, people willing to support it, but I don't have kids. So that immediately bridged that gap, which was a huge thing. I had students coming every day. We had 65 students in our first year, which, you know, talk about on-the-job training. I was really flying by the seat of my pants learning this stuff. But the results were fantastic. The kids were really enjoying the program. It was engaging them in a way that they hadn't been engaged before. And all that led to, now also very ADD, so you have to excuse me while I check back into my notes because I've gone completely off script. But it was something that the students were really enjoying. It was a type of empowerment that they hadn't received. Now, I was getting a lot of you know, at-risk kids coming through, a lot of ESL kids, which the first time the bus pulled up and with one particular school, and one of the teacher's aides that came and said, "Oh yeah, these are all ESL students." And I said, "What are ESL students?" So that kind of like painted, but again, going back to my experience with the Japanese teacher, it's like, okay, this is a great opportunity because I can show by demonstrating on working with our hands and really kind of getting these kids and going, hey, we as human beings have evolved these amazing tools on the end of our arm, and we're not really utilizing them. And so many kids came through my program in that first year that couldn't identify a screwdriver. One of the first questions I ask new students is, can you tell me where wood comes from? And a shocking amount don't know that wood comes from trees. And it's really it was a shocking state of affairs for me. I was like, okay, well, we know where the floor is. Let's figure out how to get them up. And some of those same students ended up just being phenomenal and making really advanced stuff that I would be proud if I made it. So, and I've been doing it for a while. So seeing that type of empowerment and the effect that it has on some of these kids was really huge. These are, again, a lot of the at-risk kids who are used to being in trouble. That, I get these kids coming in and they push back so hard immediately against me, and I'm like, whoa, I'm not of whatever world that you're experiencing. I'm something different. And if you want to be bent out of shape, go be bent out of shape. That's totally cool. That's on you. But we're working with dangerous stuff, and I need you to be present, and I need you to be engaged if you want to. If not, no worries. And every one of those students would end up coming back around. And some of those students that pushed back so hard initially were students that when the bus was coming at 7 o'clock, I was physically having to push them out the door. And these are kids that are up at 6:30 in the morning and just getting terrible nutrition and just not enough sleep, and it's just all around, but they wanted to be there. So that was our focus in the first year. Second year, we really were able to expand the quality of the products that we were making with the students. Just the curriculum expanded, the tooling, because I get these kids in here, and we're really doing some real world stuff with some of this equipment. We have dangerous stuff. I mean, you could essentially remove a limb with just about anything in the shop if you tried hard enough. And some of them have been able to catch it in advance. We've actually had 0 injuries, which is really, I think, a statement to how much a lot of these kids want to be here. And with those kids, we get them in there, and a lot of them are like, this feels like wood shop, this isn't of interest to me. And then you start engaging them and showing them what they can do. That power of taking raw materials and turning it into a finished product is something that they have just never experienced before. It's not like being in a classroom and getting a good grade on a test. It is something bigger than that, in my opinion. I always say that my hands have taken me places that school never could. And that's something that I really try and instill in these kids. Not in any way am I saying that school is not serving its audience in that, but we are missing a wide range of students. And all the students that come into my program, I'm very careful. I don't want to hit them over the head with the CTE stuff. Not all these kids are going to turn out to be plumbers. Some of them are going to go on and be industrial designers. They are going to take that engineering route. But the skills that I'm trying to instill in them now it's almost less about what we're making, and it's more about the experience. It's the patience, it's the teamwork, it's the soft skills that comes from it. And it's the realization that they aren't bad at everything. A lot of those kids really genuinely feel that. And from there, we had so much success in our first year that I met with Dr. Lyons in Roanoke, and he really wanted to expand this into the daytime programming, because up to this date, everything had been after school. So starting January 8th of this year, I started with the Noel C. Taylor Academy, which is the high school in Roanoke. If you're not familiar with it, kind of the last chance high. If you were kicked out of Patrick Henry or Fleming, go to Noel C. So every one of these kids is coming to the table with pretty profound baggage. One of my students got to know him. It was very hard when he walked in the door, very tough, like couldn't tell him anything, and start digging in and building a relationship with him. This kid, in the past 3 years, he was in the car with his brother. His dad wasn't in the picture. He was in the car with his older brother, in a car accident. His brother died. His mother then proceeded to kill herself after that. And this kid was basically homeless at 16, was taken in by someone in the church, and just doesn't stand a chance. And now he is so engaged in this stuff. He is such a smart kid. I'm constantly blown away. And again, all you are educators, so these are experiences I'm sure you've had. For me, I'm just like, whoa, this is amazing. But these kids that we're getting during the day, I have them 5 days a week. They're actually in class right now. I have one of my assistant teachers with them. And it is just incredible the difference that it's making in their attendance, because this is very much the carrot at the end of the rope for them in terms of going to school. And it doesn't always work. I've had students that don't show up to school but still show up to my class afterward on their own accord. And this is something that they're getting credit for. It's actual daytime programming for them. And that, one, it's an issue that they're coming without going to school, but I think that's a testament to the value that they're getting out of this. It's something that I'm trying to show them, that their career landscape can be much broader than professional musician, professional athlete, or on subsidies, because a lot of these kids, that's what they see, that's their only way out. And I very quickly go, no, you can make six figures very easily by showing up to work on time, by learning to weld, and you can really enjoy it. And it is a fast track to not only financial success, but it's a fast track to entrepreneurship, which is something that I can get a lot of parental buy-in on, because there still is such a profound stigma to working with your hands, to doing anything that's related to the skills trades. And I think we are doing our society a real disservice by not acknowledging that. And it's something that that student in particular that went through so many tragedies in the past couple of years, he's graduating this year, and he is dying to get a job. He wants to teach there, to teach the other kids, the younger kids, what they can do, because it's had such an effect on him. He just wrote me a letter last week, just blew me away, almost made me cry, made my mom cry, I shared it with her, of just what an impact coming to the class has had on him. And that's something that I never saw myself doing. I'm so fortunate to be able to do. I'm really excited to see where we can take this, because I think, again, this is something that it's not just wood shop. It's not training kids that, okay, these are your options as career. You can be a plumber. You're not smart enough to do anything else, and this is your plethora. Pick one. I'm not trying to give that example at all. I'm trying to give them context for things that have happened in their life, context for what they've learned in the classroom. I've got some of these kids doing geometry that I'm sure some of the math teachers would just lose their mind over. They would be so excited, because they are amped up to figure out what angles they need to do to have 22.5-degree angles to do a really interesting picture frame or whatever the case may be. And which, speaking of, a lot of the projects that we do, I try hard not to hit them with a curriculum. I taught at Burton for a summer before starting my own thing, and it was very by the book, and this is what we're going to make, and we're going to get into 3D printing, and it was very dry. And it's really kind of missing the opportunity, I think, which is capturing these kids' attention, meeting them at their level. And I think that is ultimately what we're doing that they haven't experienced before. I let the kids pick the projects that we're building. There's everything from drug paraphernalia to weapons tends to be at the top of the list of things that they want to make, but we very quickly say, okay, we're not doing that. Let's revisit. I've got a bunch of books. Let's look at some of this stuff, and I want you to figure out what you want to make. And I tell them, let's start at home. What in your house is broken? What can we fix? What can we do to make your most likely grandmother's life easier? So, we're making TV stands, we're making furniture, we made a dining room table, making all this stuff that they just have this great sense of pride over. Right now, we're getting ready, our final project with the high school kids this year before they graduate, is we're building a bus stop. And this is a bus stop for them to use, because they get dropped off by Roanoke City Schools through Mountain Valley, and then they have a bus pass to go home on the city bus. So when they leave class, they go out and stand across the street, and there's no bus stop right now. I've got a picture of them standing out in the snow. Would have been nice to show in a presentation, my apologies. But they're going to build that bus stop. That's going to be a permanent structure, and that's something that they get a buy-in into their community, that for as long as they're there, they can drive by and say, hey, I made that. And that's something that really, I mean, I personally, still to this day, everything that I make, I get to stand back and go, whoa, that's pretty cool. I'm glad that I got to do that. And that's about, I'm going to try and keep us on schedule here, but that's something that ultimately I think is just a profound asset for these kids to have as they enter into the real world, because otherwise they're coming at it very unprepared, and a lot of the manufacturers that I speak with verify that. So what I'm doing is ultimately I'm teaching soft skills. I'm doing it through the lens of long-term workforce development, but it's turned into something much bigger, and it's something that is having a positive impact in their school. I speak with their teachers, and it's something that they're really amped up for. I've had students, make stuff for their teachers, and that just completely changes the equation for some of them, because then it's a type of positive reinforcement from someone who may have not given them a lot of positive reinforcement. So hopefully you guys have some questions on this, and if you do, I'm happy, because I think we're about at our time here. So I'll wrap up on that and go to questions.
Not a question, just a comment.
Yes, sir.
As a former vocational teacher, I think there's a lot of guidance counselors that need to hear your presentation.
Absolutely, and I would love to do that. I've been extremely fortunate in starting this to have a really fantastic board of directors, and I Flying Dark, I would not be where I am without them. I've got 2 ex-superintendents, I've got 2 guidance counselors, one from the private sector, one from a public sector, and the rest are manufacturers and business owners. And they have been a huge asset. And I would love to do that. I would love to get in front of those kids, because I do think there is a real challenge in, again, kind of meeting the kids on their level. Obviously, safety is paramount in those situations, but there's a way of making it exciting. We don't need to build desk organizers for these kids to learn these skills. The end product doesn't matter. It's the process that matters, and I agree. Anyone else? There's a lot of people in this room. Right now, I've got, because we're kind of doing a pilot program with the daytime programming, I've got 6 students daily from them, and those are all the extremely at-risk kids. After school, I've got about 70 students that come through. Not 70 each day, that's for the week. However, it is a challenge with the 21st century under that umbrella, getting the same consistent students, because I get each one of those students from a different school once a week. And a lot of times, if I've got a pool of 15 students, I'll get 8 students one day and I'll get 13 the next, and there may not be crossover there. So it's a little bit challenging on some of the more advanced projects. We end up spending a lot of safety time with students that are just coming initially. But we look forward to expanding. We've already done a full slate for next year, and we're going to have full daytime classes and full after-school classes starting in the fall. So we are growing. Just hired 2 additional teachers, and it's something that I think we are serving some needs and some issues that are most certainly not unique to Roanoke in the Roanoke Valley. These are things that lots of communities deal with these issues. So I think it is something scalable. I would love to see different locations, different areas kind of model this, and it's something that I am extremely passionate about because it's helped me. Yes, sir.
I heard you speak, I believe it was at maybe the state convention.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I was just really impressed with that, but I was trying to remember, do y'all, your funding, do you get any sponsorships for like helping provide your materials?
So in running a nonprofit for the first time has been a very educational process for me, and I'm realizing how profoundly lucky I am, and also speaks to the need that a lot of our funding I've not had to solicit. I've had manufacturers come to me and say, how can we help? Right now I'm working with the General Contractors Association. that want to partner on something like this, that we can grow this. This is something that the money is there. Right now, I get money from the school system. I get money from the 21st Century grant, which is always a little bit dicey because you never know when that's going to end. But it's funding has not been a huge issue for us, which I'm very lucky that hasn't been the case. And as we continue to grow, I am a firm believer that the community believes in this. And I think now that we can really kind of show that this has a positive impact for the kids, it's something that the education world is really recognizing the value in that as well.
Just one more piece of that.
Yes.
When they are working on a project, the children, do they keep that, or are they able to, in some cases, market that where they can actually see the value of what they...
Absolutely. So that's something we're working towards. Is I would really love to, within our space, create a store. The kids would be able to build stuff. We can sell it, and the funding would, a small percentage would go to the kid, because I am trying to kind of instill that sense of entrepreneurship, but also to fund the program. But right now, everything the kids make, they get to take with them, which is a lot of fun around Christmas time, because we can do some really cool stuff. We made so many cutting boards this Christmas, and for them to give them out as gifts, and it blows people's minds. The quality of product that these kids are coming out. I mean, and it's still a rough bunch. Yesterday, my students, from Knoll C, I had one student with a broken hand from a fight over the weekend, one female student with 2 black eyes from a fight over the weekend. One student was clearly under the influence of something, and it's just like, okay, all right, well, the challenges are here, but how can we address them? How can we make a difference? And I'm a firm believer that we're doing it. Yes, sir.
Are you partnering with any manufacturers, any companies now for placement of your students?
No, and that's something I'm working on currently, is trying to figure out what that what that internship track can look like, because I do think there is a profound need for that. There's a lot of things happening, at least in the Roanoke Valley, at the community college level in terms of tracks to get them into employment. I'm not a huge fan of duplicated efforts, so I'm trying to work with a lot of the things that are in place and be like, hey, I'm not trying to step on your toes. I'm not trying to do anything in a different manner. I want to be the farm team. I want to be the AAA team for what you're doing. I want to prep these kids, get them comfortable. I don't want to beat them over the head with the CTE stuff. I just want them to walk in and say, hey, it's really fun making something. It's really an empowering experience to be able to take these raw materials and make something. And man, the reaction I got from my neighbor, my teacher, my grandmother, when I gave them this cutting board was just overwhelming. And that's, again, it's something, when I make someone a cutting board, that's the most fun thing in the world for me. It was, being able to make something and demonstrate the time and effort that you put into something is really a cool thing. And if you guys haven't given anybody a gift that you've made, I really encourage it, because it really, it's way better than buying something. And for, around the holidays, the kids just absolutely love it. It's a cool thing. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
I'd just like to say, I went to R&R Burton myself. Okay, cool. And if it wasn't for that, I'm not sure if I'd have got out of high school myself. So it's nice to hear somebody reaching out to people that need.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, thank you.
That's all.
Well, thanks again. This concludes my 13-year-old nightmare. Made it unscathed, and I really appreciate your time and your ears. So I'll be around if anyone wants to chat afterwards too. So thank you. Thank you.
I told the lady at my table that I've got a son I'd like to send to Aaron right now. And would that I had as much novice experience talking to a group of people as he does. So thanks again, Aaron. Thank you for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be with us today. I've got a few quick reminders before we break for lunch. Dr. Bill Daggett, one of our general session speakers from last year's annual convention, will be hosting a webinar on the systems approach to innovative best practices on March 29th. You can register for this webinar by visiting the VSBA website or contacting VSBA staff for more information. The VSBA Hot Topic Conference on April 17th in Chesterfield will focus on advancing the outcome for all students. Registration is open, so please sign up now. Lunch is available in the hallway, and you may return to this room with your meal. Have a safe journey home, and thank you again for the work you are doing as leaders, advocates, and supporters of public education in the Commonwealth and in West Virginia. We're adjourned.